Hello and welcome to our largemouth bass fin tips edition of Ask an Angler. So today we're going to be talking everything largemouth bass. It's a good time of year for it. Here early April in Oklahoma, been a little chilly with water temps. They're coming up, but we're definitely in the heart of the pre-spawn right now, quickly coming up on to their spawn, especially down in the southern part of the state. With this, we're going to go through every type of bait that you would think about using to catch largemouth bass here in Oklahoma. But these are meant to be conversational. So if I'm moving through a lure or bait too fast, or you got a question or just something random comes up, use the chat bar at any time. These are made to be conversational. So instead of doing a presentation and waiting to do Q&A at the end, if something sparks your interest or you got something that comes up from something I said, put in the chat bar. We'll just address it as we go along. And then we'll maybe have a little bit of time at the end. This is largemouth bass are the reason why we have fishing retail stores. So we got a lot of baits to go through. A largemouth bass is a sunfish. It's in the sunfish family. It's arguably the number one sought after freshwater game fish in North America. And a lot of that has to do with, tournament fishing over the years. A lot of it has to do with the fact that they're just pretty easy to catch. They have a huge mouth on them, unlike any other species that's out there in freshwater in North America. The ratio of their mouth of what they can actually eat based on their size ratio is pretty incredible. A 4-pound fish is going to have a mouth that is like that. A 10-pound fish is going to have a mouth that's like that. I mean, it can basically fit close to a bowling ball inside of it. So kind of opens up the entire dinner plate of what we can throw at them while we're out there. So we're just going to discuss all the different baits, what situations you might find yourself in where one bait might be more productive than the other. And like I said, just ask questions along the way. So get this kicked off. I'm going to start with hard baits first, and then we're going to move into soft plastics and trailers and things like that. We'll also discuss a little bit of live bait fishing, but most of these are meant to be kind of artificial angling. But we'll talk about live bait that you can use as well, because that is, before we had all this stuff, live bait, that's the way to go if you want to catch some fish. So with our hard baits, I'm going to start off with our crankbaits first. So you have a few different options for crankbaits. Your crankbaits are going to be lipless. They could be suspending. They could be rising, floating. They could be lipped. Your jerk baits kind of fall into that crankbait section. So there's lots of different options. If you go and you look for hard baits in a retail store online, the real things that you should be looking for, because you have too many options. You have every color scheme, every size. So if you're really just looking to get, hey, I want something that no matter where I go, I'm probably going to find success because I have a very good pattern and a very good size. So we'll start with our lipless crankbaits, which most people call rattle traps. Rattle trap is an actual brand name of the Bill Lewis lipless crankbait, Rat L trap. Each brand has a different name for their lipless crankbait. These are all Bill Lewis rattle traps right here. We have kind of a shad color. We got our purple back, chrome with some chartreuse, our crawdad. But what we're really looking for anytime you're going out somewhere, your purple backs, your green backs, things that are just generic gizzard shad, threadfin shad, those are always going to find success. Those are your 4 primary color patterns that you're looking for. Something with the green back, something with the gray back, something that's in a bluegill pattern, something that's in a crawfish pattern, some type of brown, red in that. Those are your 4 main things. Purple is a great color to have a little bit of a streak through. Most bait fish, bluegill in particular, which is if largemouth bass can eat anything, them and flathead catfish, they want to eat bluegill. That is target number one on their hit list when they want to go out and eat something. So with largemouth bass, well, they are pretty much a green dumpster because of their mouth size, because of their propensity to just kind of hit whatever's out there for them that they can eat. Terrestrials, ducks, bugs, insects, crayfish, crustaceans. I mean, they're going to, anything they can fit in their mouth, they're going to try to eat. And depending on where they live, they're going to develop an appetite for certain types of food sources, depending on what body of water they're in. But it's hard to go wrong with, having a crankbait in your box that is going to be red pattern, something that's got some purple in it. Just if you've ever caught a bluegill, especially juvenile bluegill, female bluegill, not your big red-breasted, big male bluegill that are, all dressed up. Just your regular run-of-the-mill 2 to 6 inch bluegill is going to have some shade of just kind of a pale sage through it, light yellow. But if you hold them up in the sunlight when you catch them, every single one of them has kind of like a turkey feathers. It's going to have that iridescent color through it. As they get older and they develop all of their physical characteristics, then they really get exaggerated. You see those bright teals, those bright oranges. But for most largemouth bass, those fish are too big to eat. A 4-pound fish is going to be looking for something in that 3 to 5 inch range. Your 5 to 7 pound fish can maybe start getting into that 6 to 8 inch range of a bait. And then anything over 8 pounds, yeah, they can get something that's 8 to 12 inches, especially a bluegill that's going to be something like that because their mouth is like that. But crawfish colors, bluegill colors, basic shad colors. And then if you happen to be in a place, pond, especially farm pond, neighborhood pond, city lake, that has a bait source in it, like a shiner, like a golden shiner, then you might mix in something like that. But really, if you just, this box right here is more for white bass, temperate bass species. Lots of silvers, lots of bluebacks, lots of greens. These are going to catch largemouth if you put it in front of them, especially when they're keying in on shad. But these brighter, flashier colors, those are just great all-around baits. But if you're really looking to target largemouth, you're looking at more of something that's going to run you like that. Just a very kind of basic shad color, little olive back. These purple backs have a nice little flash to them that really does a good job of mimicking a sunfish. That back end, that kind of, if you were just to hold it, the bait like that and just show that, well, if you were to hold a 3 to 6 inch sunfish in your hand, especially a bluegill, and rotate it in the sunlight, that's the color you're going to get. Like, that's what it's going to be looking like. So that's what they're seeing. They obviously now, with technology and 3D printing, they can make things look pretty lifelike. So here's just a basic, this is something that you would see probably in some clearer water. But that's a good one right there. Then some reds, something that's like crawfish. Those are all good ones, especially in muddy water. You get into the muddy water, you're looking at, using some of your reds, maybe even a gold. But that turbid water is really something where you can also get with as watercolor gets darker, stain, things like that. Those fish, they lose their pigment. They're losing that sunlight. So sticking with the color of the water. So if you're fishing muddy water, a farm pond, Lake Thunderbird here in central Oklahoma, something that's just always going to be really, really muddy. You're looking for reds, chartreuses, and just faded whites. Maybe something that's kind of like, we'll move over into our lip crankbaits, and I got a good example for that. Something that looks like this. This does a pretty good job of what a shad might actually look like when you pull it out of the water. If it was in turbid water, it's going to kind of lose that shine on it. So from a specialty situation, when you're in a situation where it's like, I'm trying to match the hatch, I'm trying to find something that is just really keyed in on what the primary bait source is going to look like, especially in a big reservoir, it's going to be shad. You're always going to have bluegill, different types of sunfish in your your ponds and your lakes and things like that, and they're always going to key on those shallow fish that are sitting up under docks, fish that are sitting in relatively shallow water. They're going to be keyed in pretty hard on anything that looks like a bluegill, especially at this time of year. As we move a little bit farther into the late spring, summer, we start seeing snakes and lizards and hoppers, frogs, all those types of things that, again, those shallow water bass that are sitting up against banks or underneath docks, they're going to key in on those types of patterns. But for all intents and purposes, if you're just looking for really, really good all around, like out of a box like this of our colors, then something that falls in line with kind of a purple and yellow, something like this, that's going to be a really good pattern no matter where you go. Something that's something in a bluegill, something like this, that's going to be pretty productive as well. You're always going to have success with a bait like this no matter where you go if you're looking for largemouth bass. Now, if you got into a river or creek, something like that, little long ear pattern, that's going to make up a real good portion of their diet when they're living in streams. Or if you happen to be on the eastern half of Oklahoma, you're going to have a lot of different pumpkin seeds, long ear sunfish in your small bodies of water, your city lakes, your ponds, things like that. You get into central Oklahoma, western Oklahoma, we're looking pretty much just bluegill, red ear, green sunfish, and then their crosses. And then just a basic gizzard shad, just something that's very, very basic shad coloration. That could be a gray back, a green back, a blue back in some instances, but this is a pretty good one right here. That's just very basic. If you catch a gizzard shad out of any lake in Oklahoma, it's going to have similar characteristics to that. But you have lots of choices when it comes to really anything for bass fishing, just because you walk down any aisle and there's not a whole lot that you look at where it's like, I can't catch a largemouth bass on that. So it really comes down to confidence, finding baits that you really like to throw. It's a great thing about bass fishing is, I mean, we'd throw anything. We can throw topwater, we can throw spinner baits, crankbaits, bladed baits, we can throw soft plastics, either weightless or weighted, bunch of different ways that we can weight them, whether that's through using an egg weight, a bullet weight, Carolina rig, drop shot. It's really about finding things that you get confident at, and you're going to be able to use that pretty much wherever you go, if you know what you're looking for when you get there for those bass. So crankbaits in particular are going to be utilized in reservoirs that I like to use them where I don't have a lot of structure. If I'm dealing with a lot of kind of sandy, soft bottom, lots of boulders, hard rock, things like that, things where I'm not getting hung up. It's not crystal clear water. I don't have 5-foot weed beds that are coming up 2 feet underneath the water where I can, you can run your crankbait. You can run them into things. You can run them into rocks. You can run them into logs. They're going to bounce around. You're going to get a lot of great action off of that. And that's where you're going to find those largemouth bass. For the most part, largemouth are ambush predators. So they're looking to be in a prone position when they go to attack food. So that most of the time means that they are in the gnarliest type of cover that you're going to find on a water. That could be trees that have fallen down. That could be really thick hydrilla, lily pads. As water temperatures start to get really warm in the summertime and they push offshore, they're looking for offshore humps, offshore creeks that are out, that have been flooded, where you might have some topography changes with laydowns, logs, old stumps, anything like that. That's what they're looking for. Grass flats. You'll hear that largemouth bass will make sometimes loose schools in the summer and the fall when they're looking for shad. Essentially what that is fish have pushed off of a point or out of a cove. They're in some, offshore flat or hump that maybe has some grass through it. And they're just sitting in that grass waiting for bait to go up above it. and they're looking to come up and hit. And that's where lipless crankbaits, lipped crankbaits, those come in really handy when you know those fish are sitting in some type of cover and you can actually go over the top of them. Hard baits are not as effective if you're trying to pitch them into thick cover. That's when the soft plastics come into play because we're looking to get a fall and a drop. Hard baits are meant to be power fishing, cast and retrieve, cast and retrieve, cast and retrieve. You're fan casting, you're covering a lot of water, you're looking for active fish in certain areas, and those are going to come in handy. Right now in the pre-spawn, as fish are moving up into creeks and coves and shallow sheltered areas of the body of water, they're going to be keying in on shad as they're moving it. As they start to build beds, they start getting up into the shallow water, then they're looking to defend and eat. So then bluegill become a really, prime bait pattern to have on no matter what you're throwing, because they still want to get those last bits of good calories in before they actually spawn. And then, that female, the second that she drops her eggs, she's getting out of there. So we really, depending on where you're at in the state, I don't think we've really started bass spawning in any, great numbers, even in the southeastern part of the state. So we still have a week or so left, especially in the southern part of the state, to catch fish that are at their greatest weight of the year. Those female fish that have packed on all the calories, their eggs are they're ready to go. So they're at their greatest weight. So it's an exciting time of year because you can catch those really, really big fish. But as they move up onto those beds, the females are just going to drop their eggs, get back out and rest. And then for bank anglers and people that are moving around, that's when you start finding all those different male fish. And male fish can be 3, 4, 5 pounds. So you can catch some good ones that are guarding beds or attempting to build their beds. But when they get up into that shallow zone, that's when you can run a lipless crankbait right above them and get those reactionary strikes. You can run a hard bait over the top of those beds and bam, reaction strike. But if you're looking to plug bigger sized fish before they get into that spawn, most of the baits that I have are either 1.5s, like the Strike King 1.5. Really, the one that's probably the most popular lure in bass fishing is the 2.5, which is just a little bit bigger. I always tend to fish on a little bit smaller side. I like to be sure that I can catch as many fish as possible. Big fish will still take a small lure if you put it in front of them. But, a smaller fish might turn its nose or not take a swipe at something that's too big for them. So I tend to stay in kind of that smaller medium size of all my offerings, whether it's hard baits or soft baits, but that's angler preference. Again, it's just building confidence with what it is that you're looking to do. If you're looking to go out and get tournament size numbers, 3 to 5 pounders, then yeah, you probably want to look to be using a 2.5, a 3, 3.5. Every brand has a different number associated with it, but essentially you're going from a lure profile that's about this to then you're starting to get to like where you can kind of put your hand around it. If you can palm the lure, you're in that size range where you're not going to catch 1.5 pound fish with that, but you're going to catch 4 and 5 pound fish, but it might take you a while to find them. So the smaller kind of average to medium small bait profiles, they're just going to pick up more fish along the day or throughout the day as you go, just because they're a size profile that more fish can get a hold of. Bass, but then bycatch as well. I mean, you might pick off sunfish or a big crappie, or you get into any type of temperate bass. So bait profiles that are like this versus something that's just a little bit bigger that's like that. And that's really the differences in your hard baits as well. You're really only going up 1/2 inch each size up. But once you start getting over that 3-inch profile, you really are eliminating a lot of the types of fish that you can catch. But if you're just out there to go try to catch real big ones, then yeah, stick to your bigger bait profiles and fish in a little bit deeper water, especially this time of year. Those bigger fish, they're going to want to probably spawn in 4 to 8 feet of water. They don't want to be up in 1 to 4 feet of water with water fluctuating. So if you're looking to target pre-spawn bass that are coming in to find those really, really big females, staying out in just a little bit deeper water, and deeper water is relative to where you're fishing. So if you're fishing a farm pond and all your fish are spawning in 2 feet of water, but there's a little drop that goes out into like 4 feet of water, that's where to throw your bigger bait to look for your bigger female who's looking to spawn. So just something to pay attention to when you're out there. But really all we're trying to do is just match the hatch when we're out fishing. Largemouth bass are typically not super picky. They'll key into stuff. They'll go find themselves a spot where they want to sit, and they're keying in on certain baits. This time of year, though, it's more of a free-for-all. They are looking to eat whatever the primary food source is in that body of water as they're pushing into their spawning. And then once they finish their spawning, they're going to suck back out into those transition areas. And again, they're going to look to actively feed. And from there, the fish are going to do different things. You're going to have some fish that are going to go deep. They're going to go hang out on deep structure. You're going to have other fish that are going to, live in marinas. They're going to take up all the docks and overhanging trees because they have quick access to deep water and shallow water, and they only have to go 30 yards over the course of a day. Other fish are willing to move across grass flats. That's when largemouth bass get more difficult to key in on. This time of year, it's kind of like we know that they're all coming to the same places, and those are shallow, sheltered areas of a water body. So in a farm pond, that's the backside of a point or up on a dam somewhere where they can aerate eggs, fairly shallow, and they can get through their spawning. Out on a lake, that's going to be bays, coves, even going up into creeks, inflowing water that they have. They might even go up that and utilize the bank areas or smaller tributaries that come in. But we know they're all looking to get up into shallow, sheltered water. So what they're eating along the way is probably you're going to have the best success just kind of matching what's your water clarity. If your water clarity is super, super clear, then you want to stick to very natural colors, dark backs, olives, browns, blacks, blues. That's what those fish are going to look like. That's what those bait sources are going to look like. When they can get a lot of sunlight, all of their colors are going to be out on them, all their marking. If you get into maybe it's just flooded water, so it's just the water color is just turned, but it's not typically that color. That's where your chartreuses and, your flashy lures, that's where you're going to get some success with that. And then if you just have year round, if it's a farm pond, it's just a body of water that, it doesn't have much of a good rocky inflow. So everything that's coming down is taking out clay banks and just absorbing that color. Well, then, year round, the water's fairly turbid. So fish are going to be pretty lacking in the pigment. That's when your reds match the color of the water, or you go the opposite. Your ghost whites, things that are, if a shad or a bluegill, faded colors of those bluegill. This would be a good example of like a faded bluegill that you might see if you've been fishing turbid water. It's going to look something like that, where it's going to lose that vibrance through the middle of it, and but it'll still have that little bit of iridescence of the purple, and they're always going to keep their dark back. No matter what, they're always going to stay pretty dark along the back, and then they'll fade all their colors through the side, and then they'll typically kind of keep whatever their underbelly is. Well, orange is always a good underbelly. That's what all of your sunfish species are going to have, is some type of underbelly. And they're all going to have some type of purple, green, brown, something as a dark back. But this would be a really good one in super muddy, turbid water. This would match your bluegill. It'd also do a pretty good job of matching shad. If you were in very, very crystal clear water, then something like that's probably going to work out better for you, because that's what your fish are going to look like. They're going to be able to absorb that sunlight. So, but crankbaits, hard baits, these are great around, if you don't have a lot of hang up structure around, mainly weeds. It's a pain to try to get crankbaits, especially with all those treble hooks, going through grass mats, going through lily pads. It's not to say you can't do it, but there's better options in those situations. So we're probably right on the back end if not, we could even be in the peak in some parts of the state, where that crankbait bite is going to be really good for bass because they're still out in that deeper water. They're pushing up those creeks and points that come back into those shallow areas. Well, typically you don't have a lot of structure in those areas, so you can cover a lot of water. Lipless crankbaits are great for bank anglers. You can control your depth based on the size of the lure and your retrieve speed. If you're using a lip crankbait, even if you're sticking to a medium to shallow diver that's only going 3 to 6 feet down, you're still fishing uphill coming back to the bank. So that's driving down and the bank's going like that and you're reeling from over there. So it's just easier to use lipless crankbaits, and hard baits are expensive. That's really the big issue with bank angling with hard baits. Start off with the lipless crankbait. Start off with a soft plastic and a jig head and peruse the area, see if there's anything where it's like, keep getting hung up in the same spot, keep getting hung. All right, I know not to go that way. And then maybe go into your hard baits, because it's not fun losing a $6 to $12 lure when especially when you're fishing from the bank and you really have limited options on getting that bait back. If you're out on the water, you can move your boat, your kayak, your float tube, whatever you're on, you can get over the lure and typically you can get them back. But if you're fishing from the bank and you want to use hard baits, jerk baits and lipless crankbaits, at least that way you're in control of the depth. But those are kind of those are the two primary hard baits outside of our jerk baits, which we're going to get to now. Jerk baits are probably my favorite all around hard bait year round. I really like a slender profile of a bait, no matter the species. You start getting into some of those thicker, fatter baits. I don't have a lot of confidence in them outside of very tight windows on certain bodies of water. But for jerk baits, I love jerk baits in every situation. Largemouth bass are reactionary fish, and you're putting something in front of them that teases them, and stops. If you've ever fished with live bait before for bass, and if you have a pond yourself, you have a neighborhood pond, I highly recommend this spring you test out catching a 4 to 6 inch bluegill, putting it on a hook and tossing it out there and watching how the bass respond to it, especially if you can get the bass to come to you. Reel that bluegill in, keep them on the top of the water, wait for shadows to come down, and then watch how those bass react to that fish, because it really gives you a lot of insight into how they act as a predator. Because here's this easy meal, a live fish that they know is there, but how they go about positioning themselves to when they actually want to go take it gives you a lot of insight into how they want to attack. Jerk baits are just that perfect. You can put it in the middle of the water column. Those fish are below. When you stop them, you either get a very slow rise, suspend, or just a slow sink, depending on what type of jerk bait you have. You have 3 different options. Here is a box of a whole bunch of different types of jerk baits. These are all rip stops. These are my favorite jerk bait that's out there. They have a little tail on the back end of them. They get real good stopping action. So you can work these incredibly erratically, and they always pause. But again, every color in here pretty standard. Sticking with natural colors. Golden backs, olive backs, dark kind of green blue backs, and then purple backs. And that's what I'm fond of using. Something like this. This is a good one in clear water. This is going to do a good job of mimicking not only your bluegill, but you could have some shiners or darters. It's hard to go wrong with any color of jerkbait. But if you, again, applying the same kind of rule of thumb principles, if you're in clear water, go as natural as you can. Green pumpkins, watermelons are what the branding is going to be on the packaging. But you're really just looking for dark greens, dark blues, maybe dual colored with a mix of light green, black, brown, orange, purple. Those are going to be your primary colors, especially when you're in that clear water. Then when you get into the dirty water, if it's flooding or maybe it's just in fluctuation, then you're looking at chartreuses, but you can still stick with your natural colors. When you get into that, it's red clay red, then you're looking for whites, reds, faded oranges, faded whites, faded chartreuses. That's just, you're matching the hatch. That's what those fish and bait species that are going to be in the water are going to look like. But I love jerk baits because you're typically 3 to 6 feet in the water column. You can base where you want them. You cast them out, give them a few hard cranks. You're going to get it down to as deep as it can go. And then you're just pop the rod tip, pick up the slack, pop the rod tip, pick up the slack. You can accomplish the same thing by literally just reeling and stopping if you don't want to pop the rod tip. Especially if like you're using a spinning reel, your open face. Every time you do that and go to pick up slack, you can twist your line. You get that dreaded crow's nest on it. That doesn't happen as often on a bait caster, especially if you're using like braided line or fluorocarbon line that just doesn't have a lot of memory. It's not going to wind up on you. But you can just use the reel for a jerk bait. You don't need to pop the rod over and over and over again. You can just reel, crank, stop, reel, crank, stop, reel, crank, stop. And most of the time those hits come when it pauses and it's fluttering up, or right when you go to engage it again. It's typically the bite doesn't come when you've popped it, it's moving, and then it stops. It's usually during the pause or right when you hit it again because that fish is waiting for it to make any action. But you can get onto bites pretty easily that way in a lot of different columns of the water, moving up points. They're great fishing from the bank. Just like a lipless crankbait, you're kind of in control of where it's at in the water column. You start running lip crankbaits, you just don't have as much control anymore because then it comes down to reel speed. What's your line? A lot of line floats. Like fluorocarbon's going to sink. Braided line floats, monofilament floats. So even your line property of when you're retrieving is going to have a difference on what that bait's doing. So, but jerk baits are my favorite hard bait. I like using soft plastics. I'm gonna do most of my fishing, especially for bass, finesse. Doesn't matter where they're at. If they're out in deep water, shallow water, I like pitching soft plastics or drop shotting. So I don't use a whole lot of hard baits, but if I am going to stick into those, greenbacks, purplebacks, something that looks like a bluegill or something that looks like a shad, and you're going to be in a really good starting position. Baits that are good for getting down a little bit deeper, that are kind of more on the bargain end of the scale. If you're looking for a good happy medium hard bait, like a Model A, a Bomber series, they're Model A's. If anybody lives in the Oklahoma City metro right now, Bass Pro Shops is running they got one of their bargain bins out by their reel section, and they're selling every different model of a Bomber crankbait for like $3.99, I think. Pretty good deal. You can go load up on a bunch of them. They have a bunch of different options, but they have a few really good color options in there with kind of that purple back and those green backs. And you can typically dive those Bombers between about 6 and 12 feet. A lot of like the square bill baits that are more popular in largemouth bass fishing, those are going to run more in like the 3 to 5 feet. And then you can get the deeper diving square bills that are going to be like 9 feet plus. But the Bomber, that brand of crankbaits, really good bargain value. You get a pretty good bait, and you can kind of get a little bit more flexibility out of how far they dive based on your retrieve speed, type of line you're using, the size of the bait itself. But those are a good option. So our next hard bait that we're going to here is going to be kind of our spinner baits. So spinner baits, buzz baits. With these, again, this is power fishing. You're looking to cover a lot of water. This time of year, great time of year to use spinner baits. Flipping and pitching docks. Cover early morning hours, late evening hours when those fish are really keyed in on either pushing bait to the surface or moving them around outside of kind of cover. Not a lot of structure. We're not looking to run these things through laydowns. Again, like our crankbaits, you can go bang them off of logs. You can bang them off of laydowns. More often than not, you're going to find something that finds your treble hook. Spinner baits, we don't have to deal with that. We only have the one hook or maybe a trailer hook, but 2 single point hooks that are facing upward. So you can run these through a little bit more structure, but again, you have an offset arm that can also get hung up on stuff. So it might not even be the hook point. But these are great around docks. Docks, points, wind-driven sides, so the dam, anywhere where you're getting moving water or you have really good cover for fish, that you can run these right by. This is what a basic crank or a spinner bait is going to look like. You're going to have some different blade options. Blades like this is called a willow blade. It's going to be long, slender. Then you're going to have what's known as a Colorado blade, which is kind of a short, stubby, round blade. Then there's a lot of kind of hybrid blades. So there's an Oklahoma blade, and an Oklahoma blade is basically a hybrid of the Colorado and willow blade. So it's more of a teardrop shape, and it kind of comes out a little bit farther. But most of the time in packaging, what you're going to see, you're either going to see a willow blade option or you're going to see a Colorado blade option. All they do is give off a little bit different sonic signature in the water. That's what predators are keying in on. They use the lateral lines on the side of their body to pick up vibrations. And that's, it's kind of like how a bat uses echolocation. So fish use those lateral lines. So when they feel vibrations in the water, what ends up happening is we change these blades around everywhere we go, because certain bodies of water, they throw the same blade over and over and over and over and over again. Eventually the fish will, they get pressured. So that's when something like an Oklahoma blade can come into play on a heavily pressured body of water, like Grand Lake, that gets tons of bass fishing pressure. You throw a different type of blade on that body of water, not a willow, not an Oklahoma blade, some type of hybrid or different blade, you might have more success than the guy sitting next to you who's running a standard willow or Colorado blade, because that's what gets sold. I mean, that's what's on the shelf. That's easy to go buy. It's harder to find some of the specialty blades. But on bodies of water, they get heavy, heavy pressure for fish. Switching up the blade or even the lure shape. If everything is kind of that same slender profile or the same crankbait profile, and you just go with something that's just a little bit different in the same color patterns, a lot of times for bass that are heavily pressured, that's the deal. That's what turns the tide from a big bag number day versus, yeah, we caught some fish. But if you're going to stick with spinner baits and throwing them, I mean, I only have a few options in here, but you don't really find a whole lot of different spinner baits. We're looking for reaction. We're looking for bright colors. We're looking to match shad, bluegill, something like that. So your skirts are either going to be some shade of white or chartreuse or a combination, or maybe some blue. The more specialty spinner baits that they sell, different brands, they might get into a crawdad color or a bluegill color. But if you're going to run a spinner bait, you can also run a swim jig. You can run a bladed jig. So again, confidence of the bait selection that you're going off of. If you're going to use a spinner bait, I recommend adding, especially now with technology, using some type of paddle tail swim bait. Every brand now has some style. These are the more popular ones right now that have the big tail on the end of them, big boot, gets a lot of vibration, but then the bait itself is ribbed. So you're getting subtle pulses all the way down that as they swim. And you want to put one of these on a bait. Typically, anytime I'm using a trailer, regardless of what it's on, whether it's on a spinner bait, a buzz bait, jig, bladed jig, or just something with a skirt, I want to try to match somewhat of what the skirt is. Like if I have a white spinner bait, I don't want to use a black trailer. I want to use something that's kind of a shade of that color. Doesn't have to match it perfectly, but typically I'll just, let's use a little chartreuse one. That you could use something like this And all you do is you want that hook point coming right out through the top side. So you would just work that on the nose and work it down. And then it would be on like this. And you would get, in addition to the skirt, you'd get just that little boot back there. So we have 3 different sonic signatures coming off from the boot tail, 2 different blades. Then we get the pulsing of the skirt as well as the ribs down that. It's a pretty good combo. You're hitting about 5 different sonic signatures in the water to attract attention to a bait. So if you're using a spinner bait or a buzz bait where you have the opportunity to put a trailer on, boot tail, paddle tail, whatever the brand decides they want to call it, all you're looking for is kind of a slender shaped, tapered swim bait that's got some type of boot tail on it, as opposed to like a fork, like a fluke. We'll show those later when we get into the soft plastic portion. But mixing a trailer with your, now you can just throw a spinner bait as is with the skirt, you'll catch fish. But adding a swim bait to it, especially with the ones today, can really up your catch rates, especially on bodies of water where they're known to have pretty good spinner bait fishing, which can be a lot of ponds, especially this time of year. But we're really getting into that action stage of fishing. 58 degrees, 60 degrees to 62 degrees. We're just coming up on those here in central and northeastern Oklahoma. The southern part of the state, we're probably there at least at some point during the day as it's hot. We get the overnight lows, drops it down a little bit. You really, for spawning activity, you want to see lows get to the point overnight where they hold water temperature, don't allow it to drop too significantly. And that's what will really flip the light switch for fish to get into that spawning mode, get into that active, engaged feeding as they're going into it. But as water temperatures get into those high 50s, just above 60, that's when your bass are going to be at their very most active pre-spawn. And then as water temperatures, they get post-spawn after 65 to 68 degrees, we start getting around the low 70s. Then the bite's going to kind of change over. You're going to get a lot more top water action. Bluegill are going to be spawning, so you're going to have some fish that are going to stay shallow and go after all those bluegill beds. That's when swim baits, even spinner baits can be productive, but your soft plastic baits really start to get more productive as we get into the spawn and then post spawn. But the lead up to the spawn, our hard baits, we're going to find some more success than we would, right post spawn. That's when soft plastics, slowing things down, getting more finesse, you're going to pull more fish. But right now, they're looking to gorge, get after anything they can fit in their mouth. And if it's on their diet, if it's a bluegill or a shad, and it matches it, you put it in front of them, odds are you're going to get hooked up. Some other hard baits that aren't as typically used, but you can find success with them, are going to be out in some of the deeper water. If you wanted to have a vertical presentation to fish that are maybe holding off of a main lake point, something, creek ledges, anything. If you have some fish that are stacked up, especially for boat anglers who are using their electronics to find fish, spoons, slabs, blades, boxes like this, you can find success. Typically what ends up happening is you get bycatch of really big largemouth bass when you're trying to vertically jig for white bass, hybrid striped bass, and striped bass. You end up, as those fish, if you're if you've located them in a marina or you've located them over a channel break, if they're not just out over open water where largemouth bass just aren't at, a lot of times hair jigs, slabs, blades, vertically jigging for temperate bass species at this time of year, you can get some pretty good bycatch of hitting a really, really good sized largemouth that's out in that 25-foot range off of a ledge that hasn't quite pushed up into more of a transition area yet. So not used as much, but certainly can find success with those types of lures. And then some even less used hard baits that can also find success of You're out at the lake, you're out at the pond, and you got some like spoons or little cast masters, typically trout lures, maybe even white bass lures. You'll find success with lures like these. Ones that have especially ones that have tails on them. I mean, just working that through slow and steady through the water column, a cast master, you're going to pick off bass with these if you're putting them in front of them, because this does a very nice job of just mimicking shad and bait fish. And at this time of year, if you can put it in front of a bass, odds are you're going to have success hooking up on them. So really, it's about locating fish, and then utilizing whatever is most advantageous for you as an angler, whether that be confidence of using the lure, your location. If you fish ponds a lot, you know that you can't just be ripping crankbaits through there because you're losing $11 on tree stumps all over the place. Same thing goes at a lake. If you're especially when you're bank fishing, if you're walking around, take in mental inventory, use some cheap soft plastic jig head and a trailer that can catch fish. Use that as your search bait to start. Kind of browse the bottom of the lake by using cheaper baits. It's like, okay, I haven't hit anything. This is a good spot to use a lipless crankbait or a diving crankbait. I know that I'm not going to get hung up on anything. And if you don't have a boat or you don't have heavy knowledge of the area that you're fishing, largemouth bass by and large, especially as we're moving into this time of year and then post spawn into the summer, we're looking for largemouth bass in the gnarliest cover on the lake. So they want to get themselves into anything where they can just sit still and wait for something to present itself. They're a little bit less cautious right now. They're just trying to feed. So they're willing to give chase. This is when you have really good lipless crankbait bites on bodies of water, especially ponds, smaller bodies of water that you would typically almost never throw a hard bait in. Those fish are willing to give chase because they know I got to build up my calories. I got to get to spawn. But once they've gotten to that point, that's when they turn back into we're finding cover, we're finding structure, we're looking to ambush, we're not really looking to give a lot of chase. We just want something to fall right in front of us and we react to it. Maybe it's something that piques our attention. We give it a couple of bounces and then we're willing to take. But this is the time of year that, especially for bank anglers, you can plug some really, really nice fish throwing hard baits in coves, off points, in marinas, off docks. That's just what they're looking for. Super dupers, again, if you're white bass fishing on a body of water right now, or you're trying to catch some crappie and you're using something like this, just like a super duper. Nothing fancy to it, just a shaved, molded piece of metal that gives off a flash that looks just like a little shad or bait fish. But you put that in front of a largemouth that's sitting behind a rock, they're looking to feed, they're going to take that any day of the week. So that's the great thing about largemouth bass fishing, is pretty much anything that you throw at them, if you can put it in front of them, they're going to take it. So rooster tails are great at this time of year. Smaller profile baits. I catch some of my largest largemouth bass at big bodies of water in April crappie fishing. I catch them incidentally. It's just bycatch. Catch them on little swim baits, worm in a bobber fishing for catfish during, pre-spawn catfish. So don't overlook basic baits. You don't need to go spend $40 on hard baits to have success catching really nice fish, no matter where you're fishing, whether that be at your local pond, city lake, or at one of the major reservoirs along the state. If you're fishing around areas that are known to have bass around them, which are going to be marinas, docks, creek arms that come out, so sheltered water, and especially if you can mix in any type of shade, cover, structure. So you can mix in maybe a grass flat that comes up onto a rocky shore that's protected, that has a couple of docks that come off of it. The more of those features you can add into a small area, the more success you're going to find. But don't overlook. I mean, if you can make casts, no matter where you're fishing, make as many casts as you can make, because you never know where there might be a fish just sitting on something that there's a stump or a hump or a hole that you had no idea was there. And this is the time of year that what might be there might be your personal best fish or one of the biggest fish you've ever caught. Some other swimming hard baits before we move to the true soft plastics are going to be our jigs, our bladed jigs, and then we'll do a little bit of top water. So here's a box of jigs. Again, pretty natural colors in here. We got our blacks and blues. We got lots of different green pumpkin type colors, and then kind of a bluegill color. Most of those are going to come with a little bit of a chartreuse flash to them. Jigs are great. Got the skirt on them. You get nice little, it's soft pulsing in the water. It's very lifelike. Jigs come in all different types of jig head types. There's ones that are meant to be pitched into cover and let them fall down, pop them a couple of times, rip them right back in, throw them right back out. Other jigs are going to have, what's known as kind of a swim jig head. The jig head is going to look a lot like the jig heads that you buy to pair soft plastics with to actually just cast and retrieve. But you can cast and retrieve all of these. You can also let all of these fall down to the bottom and pop them up and jig them back to you, with the trailer on. If you're going to go that route, if you're going to be bottom jigging, pitching it into thick cover, around structure, and you're letting it fall to the bottom and you're popping it up, letting it fall, popping it up, then you would probably want to pair it with, something that's like a craw trailer, something that's either a twin tail grub. Most of them are labeled as craw. That's what you're going to see on the packaging for a soft plastic. Something like this, where it says Rage. This one says Rage Chunk on it, but they're all going to have just a short, stubby kind of just a chunk of plastic that you can get onto your hook. And then it's going to have your two claws off the back. So most of your craw trailers are going to mimic that in some way. Some of them are labeled mud bugs. Basically anything that isn't a single appendage coming off the back, it's a double appendage. Those are great to pair on a jig, whether you're swimming it or if you're bouncing it along the bottom. But especially if you're bouncing along the bottom, twin tail trailers, it could be a pork chunk. They're different labels, but you're looking for two appendages on the back if you're going to move it along the bottom or slowly retrieve it along the bottom. If you're looking to swim it straight in, you're going to cast it and you're just going to reel it, and we're looking to mimic some type of bait fish, bluegill, shad, whatever, then you might go with a paddle tail swim bait, boot tail swim bait, a fluke, a worm, curly tail grub, something that's a single appendage in the back because you're looking to mimic some type of bait fish that's moving through the water. Now, when crawdads swim, they kick that tail down and they have the two legs hanging behind it. So you can also do that, but typically that's going to be lower in the water column. So if you're going to just slow roll a swim jig or any type of football head jig, whatever it is, if you just want to slow roll it in and mimic crawdads, keep it down towards the bottom, make sure you're using some type of dual appendage. In Oklahoma, if you're looking for just, I want something that's going to work anywhere where I go, I'm not trying to match a hatch, I just want something that's standard. Green pumpkin with red and black flake, some type of black and blue. Those are your two basic colors. Something that is like this, that this one has a little bit of that red flash in it. This is green pumpkin. Can never go wrong with this color, and really can't go wrong with, something that's like this, just a black and blue. Those are going to cover your two main species that you're really trying to mimic as you're utilizing a jig. But then something like this is also a good option to have, something that's got some blacks, browns, and chartreuses through it. This is going to do a good job of kind of being a dual purpose. This could mimic some type of crawfish. You could put a trailer behind this. You got your blacks and reds. You could put a craw trailer on that. You could put a straight chartreuse paddle tail swim bait on that and rip it through the water. You could put a naturally colored worm or swim jig or a swim bait behind this, and you're going to accomplish the same thing. So those are kind of your three color patterns. But if you're just going to stick to two, green pumpkin is your base with some type of red and black flake on it, or a black and blue. Usually they'll have, the blue will have black flakes on it and the black will have blue flakes on it. They also make kind of specialty jig heads now, like the Ned head, something like that, where when it goes, it stands straight up like that when it's stand straight up and down on the hook point. So these are great you just work these along the bottom and they just stand up. You can get creative with these. You can put on, just straight trick worms, straight stick worms, little tiny stick worms. You can put on a craw trailer, but you can hop these along the bottom great, or you can pick them up, reel a little bit, let them come up and fall. So jig heads themselves have gotten a little bit more water dynamic in recent years. Gives you a few more options of how you want to fish them along the bottom. But as long as you're sticking to a green pumpkin or a black and blue or some variation of those two colors, those are great starting points. You don't need to really get outside of that realm. Our swim jigs, bladed swim jigs. So most people know them as chatterbaits. That's a Z-Man's brand is called chatterbait, but bladed jigs. I'm going to look something like this. Different size jigs, anywhere ranging from 3/4 of an ounce to 1/8 of an ounce. Some of them have bigger blades on them, get a little bit more vibration. With these, because you can get them down along the bottom, I keep a couple of red patterns for crawdad, something red and orange, straight red, something like that. Have a couple of those around, because when they really start keying in on crawfish, especially we're kind of coming out of that. It's usually like February, March. But if you can run those, especially in like rivers and things, or you're running them down along the bottom, you can get a lot of great action out of those. But again, most of my bladed jigs are going to be in a blue and black base, or they're going to be in some type of green pumpkin or watermelon base that's got red or black flake in it. Again, you can get creative with what you throw on your trailer with them. You can also get creative with what you do with the jig itself, with the skirt. Sometimes, especially with the white or chartreuse, if I'm using them to target like temperate bass, or if you were targeting largemouth out in deeper water, trying to swim them, you can cut your skirt. What I'll do is I'll just pull every other one up and cut it. So when it's swimming through the water, every other one goes about 1 inch down. And what that does is it gets it kind of like the pectoral fins on the front. So I get pulsing on the front, like pectoral fins moving, and then you get on the back, and then you add some type of, matching trailer to it, whether it be white, chartreuse, whatever the color is, sticking somewhat similar with it. But bladed jigs are great. It's hard to go, like, if you're looking for a good hard bait mixed with the soft bait, but I consider bladed jigs a hard bait because it's power fishing. You're not really jigging them. You're just straight retrieving them at some type of retrieve speed. These are always going to be great. You're creating a lot of action. You can pair them with a soft plastic trailer. You're kind of getting the best of both worlds. You're getting that vibration and flash from the blade, just like a hard bait, just like a crankbait that's got balls or rattles or something inside of it that's making some noise. You get a more natural bait presentation. That softer presentation is going to get more finicky fish that are, especially if they can see it really well. Your jigs are going to have more success than a hard bait is, where if they get a really good look at a hard bait, and they're not just actively engaged in gorging themselves, they might say no to a hard bait. They might follow it for a while and meh. Typically with your jigs, whether it be a swim jig or a bladed jig, kind of get the best of both worlds, where you can really power fish, cover a lot of water, but you're adding the soft plastic dynamics that are more subtle, more natural. That's just it's a great way to go, especially at this time of year. If you're fishing in current, things like that, if you have inflowing water, if you're fishing in a river system, something like that, chatterbaits, bladed jigs, those are a really good way to go for your hard baits. Now, the last hard baits we have, we're not really quite into this time yet, but we're fastly approaching it, and that's going to be our topwater baits. When it comes to largemouth, you're looking to fish. I mean, and this is pretty standard with all topwater fishing, but you're really looking to take advantage of the first couple hours around sunrise and the last couple hours around sunset. That's when you get a lot of predator fish that are up in that shallow water. They're looking to ambush things on the top. You get bug hatches, things like that. There's just a lot of surface activity typically at that time of day. So lots of different topwater options out there. My personal preference for topwater for largemouth bass is going to be some type of frog, especially if you have heavy cover. You got lily pads, hydrilla, even throwing frogs up under docks, not to mimic frogs, but to mimic bluegill. A lot of the different frogs that they sell, if you work them across the water, they can look just like sunfish during the summer. When sunfish will come up, bluegill, they'll sit right on the surface. And they'll kind of just mull around the top, feeding, sunning, whatever they're doing. But when you flip them up over docks and they're shadows, a lot of times bass are coming up to get it, not because it's a frog, because they think it's a bluegill. And it does a really good job of that, especially your darker colors, something like this. That's going to do a good job. But these hollow body frogs, ones where your hook points are on the top like this, that is going to be your breadwinner. Just about anywhere where you have heavy cover. You don't want to be throwing, double trebles underneath across lily pads when you can just skirt that across or skirt that across the grass. The only downside to these guys is that you can do everything right. You can get the take, you can be patient, let the fish take it back underwater. But for whatever reason, how it hit it and it moved the plastic around, sometimes it throws the hook backwards. The hook success with these is fairly low for most topwater. There's just a lot of things that are out of your control when the fish hits it where you might not get hooked up. But it's hard to beat a hollow body frog. That would be my number one go-to for topwater for bass all day long in thick cover. Lily pads, hydrilla, floating yellow heart. I mean, anything that's just going to be thick, that there's nothing else you can really get in there unless you're just going to be shooting an ounce of lead with, Texas rigged or something, trying to punch through those mats. You don't need to necessarily punch through the mat, because in the middle of the day, bigger fish are willing to come up and take something off the top. Now, if I was out maybe along the edge of that, or if I was in a creek, a creek arm or something where there's just a lot of activity, a lot of times bass will push into the back end of a cove, early morning, late evening. Sometimes I do it in the middle of the day, but typically it's usually in the morning or the evening hour. If that's the case, I really like the Berkeley Choppos right now. Got the little spinning blade back on the back. These are great. These are walking dogs. This just is a little bit simpler. You don't have to work these as hard as opposed to using something like this that's got kind of that front mouth on it like that. So it's meant to kind of walk the water as it goes in. It takes practice to learn how to use those. You can pretty much do the same thing with this, and all you have to do is just retrieve it in. And it just gives that perfect little gulping sound that fish and frogs and lizards, snakes, that they make during surface disruptions. So these Berkeley Choppos in a bluegill or a frog, here's a frog one. Black's always a solid topwater color, no matter the water clarity. There's just, because this could be anything. Again, when we're trying to get surface strikes, there's a lot of different surface strikes that will happen on a body of water at any given time from any given fish. and it could be a duckling, it could be a frog, it could be a snake, it could be a lizard, it could be a insect, it could be a fish that might not actually be on top of the water. It's just subsurface, but those fish are coming up and grabbing them and breaching the surface as they're getting them. Choppos, anything that's got a propeller. So Hedon used to make and still makes, but this is kind of the original Chopo. Just the old torpedo propeller. You're getting the same deal. The Chopos just make a little bit more noise and a little bit more gulping along the way. But walking dogs, something like that, a little thicker body profile. But again, it's got some rattle balls in it. It's just meant to make surface disruption. These are great. I fish a lot of ponds that have golden shiners in them. And golden shiners, my baits are actually too small for those golden shiners. So I consider this a pretty big bait. I mean, that's most of my hand. This is going to be a 4 or 5. Then it's like a 5 1/4 inch lure. This is pretty big topwater. Obviously not for a largemouth bass, but this is great on the ponds I fish. Post spawn, usually late May, early June. When those bass have kind of come back around out of their spawn. Now they're looking to disrupt the bluegill spawn. They're looking to feed, but a lot of the ponds have these shiners in them, and some of them are 14, 15, 16 inches. They're like trout. But that gold can be real solid in farm ponds just because shiners get moved around. A lot of people stock them in their ponds. So having a backup gold color for a topwater. Here's a Chopo and that golden shiner. But that's a good one. That I have a lot of success with those golden ones, especially on the ponds that I fish that have those shiners in them. So again, trying to match the hatch as closely as possible. But when it comes to topwater baits, basic shad, so silver and black back, something with an olive back, something that is a bluegill, something that's a frog, something that's black, and then something that maybe is a gold or a purple. Just depending, and that's more of a match the hatch type deal. When it comes to frogs again, can't go wrong with black. A black color that's always going to be good for topwater, because a lot of times the fish can't tell when they're low enough below, but all fish are going to be dark on the top side. That's to protect them from avian predators, owls, hawks, herons, egrets. They have that dark back to blend into the bottom to cover, and then their bellies are light, vice versa. When they're high up in the water column and predators attack from below, the light belly matches the sky. So it kind of protects them a little bit. So black, can't go wrong with black, especially in dirty water. If you're in muddy, stained, black, that's just a good shadow on the top. So hollow body frog, a little bit of brown tail right here, his little legs, black body. This is going to be really good. And then just anything that's got some type of yellow or brown on the bottom. I mean, the fish can't really see the top side of it. They might catch it as it rattles, but basically anything, that's going to be your basic bullfrog right there all over Oklahoma. Greenback, yellow body. Hard to top those two colors. Now, poppers, you can find success with poppers. Poppers get a lot of harassment from bycatch, sunfish in particular. Throw a popper across the top. Fire tiger. So what fire tiger pattern is a yellow perch. So if you've ever fished in the northern part of the country, basically the Canadian border, all the states up there, they all have what are known as yellow perch. It's an actual perch. It's got little stripes and bands through it. That's what the walleye eat. That's what the smallmouth bass eat. That's what the largemouth bass eat. That's what sunfish eat when they're fry. This is that color pattern. It's typically labeled as fire tiger or fire perch, but on the top water, it's great. It looks just like our little bullfrog. So fire tiger patterns in Oklahoma are great for top water because they do a great job of mimicking our frogs. Now, if you're going to use a fire tiger crankbait, jerkbait, soft plastic that's colored that way, you get a lot of good colors in there that mimic a lot of the species here. but it wouldn't be my primary option to go to. I would always start when you're largemouth bass fishing, something that is and we'll go through those here with the soft baits because we can really get into color detail. Hard baits, you pretty much have standard 15 to 20 color variations of every brand, and then every brand has that same color variation. So if you take away anything from this on hard baits, it's if you're sticking to a size profile that's kind of in a 2.5 to a 3.5 range, that's going to really open up the amount of fish you can catch. If you're specifically targeting tournament size fish, 3 to 5 pounders, then it doesn't hurt you to start off with more of like a 3.5 to 5.5 profile to start, because that's really all that's going to be able to eat that. So you stick with that. If you're looking for just your generic color, because every body of water is going to be a little different. Every local angler is going to have their favorite bait, brand, color. This is all you need to use. That's the fun of fishing. You figure that out as you go along. And each body of water is going to have something like that. And that's part of the fun of fishing, is figuring that out and then having confidence, because you don't need 100 tackle boxes to go fishing. You really should have one tackle box. As you learn things, it's like, I'm confident in this bait. I'm confident in this bait. I'm confident in this bait. So year round, when you're getting out on the water, you should have it over the years nailed down into like, I know this works. I know this works. I know this works. If they're biting, I'm going to catch them on this. If they're not, then they're not. That's just fishing. So really the biggest thing with anything you do in fishing is just finding confidence, because everything that I've shown you will catch fish. Some of it I never even take out of the box. Somebody mentioned it first. Why do all your lures look new? Some of them are new. Some of them have never been used. Other ones get thrown in the water once or twice, dried off, put back in the box, no bites on them, look clean as new. I have other ones that are, they have the paint peeled off of them because I'm like, I know this one works. So I just use it over and over and over again. So that's what you're looking for, is finding a power bait, finding a soft plastic, finding something where it's like, this is how I like to fish. This is how I like to throw. These are the colors I should be looking for. I'm going to have success pretty much anywhere I go. And for hard baits, that's, going to be pretty much the same as soft plastics in colors, but hard baits are typically multicolored. They usually have a dark back, light body, some type of intermediate in between. And that's just how fish are. They're going to have that dark back, light body, and then something in the middle based on light penetration, water clarity, turbidity, stuff like that. So greenbacks, purplebacks, goldenbacks, those are your primary color bases. If you're going for shad, there's going to be days where you're going to find fish on those chartreuses, those really bright colors. But just overall, olive, any type of olive, green pumpkin type back, that's going to be really hard to beat. Something that's got some type of gold, yellow body, that may have some purple flash in it, some chartreuse flash in it, just that iridescent color that you get off of turkey feathers, off of bluegill when you hold them up in the sunlight, that flashing back and forth between chartreuse, yellow, and purple when you turn something. If you stick in just a color like that, you're going to find success no matter where you go if you're throwing a hard bait. So those are the real big things. But you take anything away, it's clear water, natural colors, green, brown, black, blue. Stained water, you can get away with chartreuses, oranges, some whites, some silvers. That's going to be, because they can't really see that well, but it's dingy, but they can see, so that flash is what gets them. Then when you get into the downright dirty water, muddy, flowing fast, whatever, it's just fish are going to be losing their pigment. You're going to want to stick to those reds, bone whites, pearl whites, things that kind of have color, but it looks like the color's been sucked out of them. Those are going to be your best choices just to start off. And then from there, those are good building blocks to find something that you're super confident in to move forward with. So that covers all of our hard baits. So we're going to move into the soft plastics now. And this is really where bass fishing has just exploded over the years, with every which different type of soft plastic bait that you can make and the colors that you use for them. So we're going to start with our swim baits. So a swim bait is going to be anything that mimics a fish, bait fish, usually a shad or a bluegill. It can have a paddle tail, boot tail, different language for different brands. Could be a fluke, could be a fork tail, could be a pre-molded. So you're buying something that already has the hook and head and eye hole on it, but it's a soft plastic. Lots of different options. So here is kind of my crappie, walleye, and sand bass box. But if you have a box for like little boot tails that you're using for crappie and things like that, especially on smaller bodies of water, ponds, city lakes, you're going to find some success in here. I would stick more with the more natural colors, something like that. It's going to do a really good job of mimicking bluegill fry, first of the year. You know, you're going to catch fish on chartreuse occasionally. It's kind of rough to see. But it's kind of that dingier water. You just got a better chance. If you're ripping chartreuse through clear water, even through super muddy water, you'll catch fish. It's just odds are it's probably not going to be largemouth. You're going to pick up a lot of white bass, crappie, maybe even spotted bass that are a little bit more aggressive on some different colors, maybe even a smallmouth bass. But largemouth, they're really looking for that kind of 3 color schemes that you can get into. And if you can get anything that looks like that, doesn't matter what it is, they're usually going after it. So here's a bunch of soft plastics in a box. We have some baits that are made. They have, so these are a paddle tail. These ones have an open cavity on the bottom of them. Now, these are the types of baits that are meant to be paired with hooks that look like this. Weighted hooks, where on the shank of the hook, there's some type of weight. That sits right up in the body of the bait when you put it on. So when you go to rig it, you go through, you can do it a couple of different ways. This one is easiest, just to go up through the cavity. And you can actually just take the eye hole and just go in through that body cavity and then just work that eyelid up through. So it gets through like that. And now we're already in, and we didn't have to do any damage to any part of the bait by trying to run the hook point through and then run that lead part over or through the nose, which is going to rip up the plastic. But so basically you can rig it on and you're like that, and then sits internally like that. So anytime you see soft plastics that have that opening in the middle, now you could fish this on a just on a jig head, like any type of jig head. Just, I don't think I have any in that one. We'll take a big one. You could take the same exact deal and just take a ball jig head or some type of swim jig head, and then you could just work it because you still have the cavity is only about 3/4 of the way up the back. So when you go through the nose, you would essentially just be working that either through the open air pocket or through the actual meat of it. But you could fish those 2 ways. But when you see the ones that have that deal where there's the opening on the bottom, those are meant to have a weighted hook. That's what these are made for, is to fit right up in there. Because if you were to try to take this, now you could do it with this one. The first one I showed you was too big. It's going to ruin the plastic. But if you tried to rig this like you would a jig head and go straight through and then work it up and get all of that lead to go through the nose, you're going to poke a big hole in the front of that, and it's not going to be as effective. So when you do have the ones that have the open slip on the bottom, just take your hook and take the eye hole and go up into it, into that gap up there. And you can actually, because this one is kind of clear and see-through, you can actually see the eye hole in there right by the little dot. And all you do is, so now I'm in the air pocket, and that's as far as it'll allow me to go. You can kind of see inside where that eye holes at and just poke it right through the nose. But these are great for, swim baits are so versatile now. I mean, you can use them for anything. You can put them as a trailer. You can put a jig head on them. They make hooks where you can internally weight them. They make other specialty hooks where you can twist them on and they have the weight on the hook shank. So lots and lots and lots of different options for swim baits these days. And they're very lifelike. They're very quiet. Personally, I think swim baits work best in somewhat clear water. You're not giving off as much as of a sonic signature. So now if you're in a pond, can you get away with it and it's muddy? Probably. There's a lot of fish per acre, not a very big area. If you're out on a major reservoir, you're just going to be filtering water all day with swim baits if you can't locate fish, and especially if the water is not very clear. Now, when water's clear, this is perfect. That's why swim baits are all the rage, is because there's nothing that ambush predators love better than something that is super lifelike, that's unsuspecting, and goes right by them. And then when they grab these soft plastics, they even feel today more fishy. I mean, if you were to grab a shad or a bluegill, you get an extra second when they grab these things because they don't immediately let go. And a lot of them now are scented and everything else to try to keep the fish to hold on to it. But you're gonna see a lot of different options like this right here, pretty much accomplishing the same thing. We have a boot tail, got a good color pattern, but this is more of like a chunk trailer. This is something that you would put on a swim jig or a bladed jig, or maybe on the back of a spinner bait. So ones that are kind of chunky and odd looking like this, that kind of have those square heads on them. Most of these ones were designed to be used as trailers, but because they are so versatile, I could rig this Texas style, where we're just going to take a regular offset hook. We're going to poke through the nose and come out the belly or the underside, work it up the hook, put it in, make it weedless. So snap it through the back, pull that forward. We're setting on, tie that on, throw a bullet weight right on top of it. And you could just straight swim that through. You could pitch this into cover, let it fall straight down, jig it up a couple times, work it right back in like a jig. There's countless ways to work swim baits. They really are the all the rage, and they are the way of the future for fishing as far as soft plastics go, because it's just really hard to beat their versatility, and they do just such a good job of being lifelike. But as long as you're sticking in natural colors, here's a green screen with some speckles through it. This is going to mimic a lot of different types of forage species that you're going to find in a body of water. This one is more of a kind of a thread fin type pattern. We have that light blue back, a little bit of chartreuse on the bottom. Get our shad. Anytime you see that little dot on there, that little black dot, that's what shad have on them, is that little black dot kind of somewhere back behind the ear hole. Sometimes it's farther back, sometimes it's farther forward, just depending on the fish. But anytime you see that little circle on either side of a bait, just a black circle, it's mimicking some type of shad, is what those are for. Then we have really small minnows. You'll see things like that have like a fluke. It's going to have that fork tail on the end of it. These are great to throw on a drop shot rig, where you're just dropping that down to the bottom and that thing's just going to pulse. Nice little subtle bait profile. But you can also throw it on a jig head. You can also throw it on a offset hook with some type of weight. But lots and lots and lots and lots of different options these days for swim baits. If I was to pick one that I really think has kind of out fishing the other ones right now, as far as, it's going to be the ribbed ones. It's going to be ones that you're going to see these. Every brand is now going to have these. And what I've noticed, especially this fishing season, these are usually prominently placed in retail stores. They're usually on some front-facing stand, kiosk to sell because they're being advertised. But these really are kind of that slick next deal. You get all the best characteristics of worms and grubs that have been experimented with over the years of trying to perfect a worm, trying to perfect a grub. We've just kind of come to the point now where these swim baits are just so lifelike, but the ribbed ones are especially good. Now you might have a box or something that looks like this, bunch of sassy shad for white bass. These are going to catch largemouth occasionally. You throw that out. I mean, you just a little bit shorter profile. These are really good in smaller bodies of water, ponds, creeks. Little smaller bait profile. Whites, olives, dark backs, same kind of color schemes for everything. If you're mimicking shad, if you're crappie fishing or white bass fishing or something, again, small bodies of water, reservoirs, pond, or small city lakes, farm ponds, neighborhood ponds, especially these bluegrass, these blueback ones, things that mimic bluegill fry. You can catch some really, really big bass in farm ponds. I mean, 3, 4, 5 pound fish on 1/32 ounce jig head and little tiny 1.5" profile bait. Some more swim baits. So again, lots of different types of trailers that can be used. So some of these are going to be flukes. Some of these are going to be paddle tails. But all kind of similar bait profiles. Most of these are going to run you in the 4 to 6 inch range. I like the smaller side. Even if I'm in a big reservoir, I like to be on the smaller side of the bait profile I'm using if I have multiple options. I like catching fish, and if that means that I'm going to catch a lot of half pound and pound and a half fish mixed in with a good one every now and then, I'm going to take that over specifically trying to target 4 or 5 pounders. But if you are going to go that route, then a box that's more like this, where we're getting into much bigger profiles to start. So we have our Magic Shad, a jointed swim bait. These are great. I love these jointed swim baits. These, you can't burn them through the water if you're looking to straight retrieve them in, because that joint it just gets too funky. But these are great weedless and weightless. So like if you're farm pond fishing or small city lake fishing, you would just rig this like you're going to Texas rig it. Go right through the nose, out through the belly, back through the body, out through the backside, and back into the plastic. No weight on it. Just cast it out there, in and around cover. Just let this thing flutter down. And I mean, every drop, it's going to take this thing 10, 15, 20 seconds to get down to the bottom in 5 feet of water because it's got no weight on it. You just jig it up once, let it flutter up, and then fall back down. This is the time of year that I use this type of bait, especially in ponds. I'll go to the jointed swim bait. You can also put them on, here's one where we have kind of that underside rigging again. So this type of Magic Shad, it does have that open body in the middle. So you could put one of the hooks that I showed a minute ago, or you could have one like this that just has the weight and we have a flasher. So something like this, just a really slow retrieve. You're going to get kind of the bait flash below it like you would on a spinner bait or an umbrella rig, something like that. That's a pretty deadly combo right there. And this is a really good color. Right now, you can see it looks really purple in that color to you guys on the screen just because of the way I'm holding it. But when I'm looking at it on this backside, I don't see any purple. So this is a really, really good imitator of what bluegill in your ponds are going to look like, especially ones that are a little bit dirty, where those fish, especially the females they don't have that big bright red on the bottom and the big dark back. And then juvenile sunfish are also going to be more of that lighter pasty kind of color through them. But that iridescent, that purple flash that's on there that really isn't noticeable to you. Like on my side, I don't see any purple. It's not until I look in the computer screen and hold it like this where the light's hitting it from above. But that's what you're getting underneath. So when you can match colors like that, look like that, especially in ponds, small city lakes, where bluegill are pretty much the only thing on the menu, you get into big reservoirs. You have crawdads, you have shad populations, you have all different sorts of forage for largemouth. So on a big reservoir, your population on that lake they could be doing a lot of different things. You could have fish in one part of the lake that are heavily feeding on bluegill. You could have fish on the other part of the lake that are feeding heavily on shad in a different type of water. You have fish up maybe creek banks or creek beds that, man, there's a bunch of hoppers. They're coming up, they're eating, grasshoppers that are hitting the top of the water, or they're keying in on lizards or snakes or rodents that are getting in the water. It's just, when you're on smaller bodies of water, bass are a little bit more predictable. But typically, if you're sticking in these types of colors and bait profiles, you're going to find success even when you're trying to get those fish to eat, when they might be eating something else. That's why those purples, olives, green pumpkins, it's just a good all around color because it matches so many different types of forage. From a shad perspective, these bigger bait. So this is going to be like a 5-inch bait. This is going to be like an 8-inch bait. These are on some pretty heavy duty jig heads, real good soft plastic. I use these a lot in tailwaters for our hybrid striped bass and striped bass, but this bait right here, if you're trolling that behind you or you're running that along a dam, it's a bait like that could find you that double-digit fish, especially on a body of water that is known to have big fish, an Arbuckle, a Cedar Lake, where Alabama rigs are very popular, where they catch a lot of fish. You could be running your Alabama rig all day long. Maybe you use that as your back trailer. So you have some smaller ones up front, but you go with a really big bodied bait. But just a natural gizzard shad, kind of this just straight gray back, or you get that little bit darker blue with that just slight line of kind of a chartreuse yellow, your thread fin. But these are going to be your big bait getters if you're looking to just try to catch that one really big pre-spawn lunker fish, and that's all you're trying to do. You don't care about anything else. You're just trying to plug a double-digit fish. That's what I would do. I'd run a lake all day long, either trolling or finding good spots to fan cast, and I'd be using a 5, 6, 7, 8-inch big profile shad swim bait or bluegill swim bait. And I just use that all day long, just looking for a big fish. And that's going to be your best bet at getting it. But there's nothing to say that you also aren't going to plug that same big fish on a 1.5-inch tube that you're flipping around your farm pond or city lake, catching more fish to begin with, but you put it in front of the right one. So that brings us to our umbrella rigs. So umbrella rigs, something that looks like this. These are very generic. These are just Yum. I believe it's called the Yumbrella Junior. They now sell them in something that looks like this, a little Flash Mob Junior package, where it actually comes with jig heads, and they've partnered with a bait company to make soft plastics tailored to their swim baits. These are expensive. They work, but they're expensive, and they can find a lot of danger really quickly. You can get umbrella rigs sometimes cheap at local bait and tackle shops where they're homemade. They're accomplishing the same thing. I mean, all an umbrella rig is just putting multiple hooks in a school, what looks like a little bait ball, and then running it through. But if you do happen to get umbrella rigs, regardless of what they are or brand, finding some type. So this isn't the best in the world. They'll sell like different attachments where you could get more in if you wanted to. This is the best way that I found to store them, because they are expensive and I don't want to break an arm off, and they're not very, you can't really fit them in a normal tackle box. They need the divider arms where it holds it all together. You can see down there, it's kind of like a hole, and the head goes through the little slit up here, and then it holds the arms down. Kind of inconvenient. I mean, this is a huge box to have 4 baits in it, but I'm sure there's specialty boxes they make now that are, individually sized where you could throw them in. But if you are going to use umbrella rigs, I don't recommend ever using them from the bank. Using them on boats or somewhere where if you do get hung up, you have a much better chance to go get it back. If you're throwing out the back of them, most of the time they come with 8-ounce weights. So your jig head's going to be in the 1/8 ounce variety, but you're also putting 5 of those on. So, we're looking at a 5/8, a 3/4 ounce, that's pretty standard. That's a big swim jig. That's a big, but it's not too much. You get to the really, really big swim baits, the striper swim baits, or the ones where the head of the rig is actually weighted. These umbrellas, there's really that fish head in the front is just an eye hole with a painted piece of fish head. That's not an actual weight on it. But you start putting on 1/4 ounce jig heads or 1/2 ounce jig heads, just add those up. That's a lot of weight behind your rod. So typically, if you're going to run an Alabama rig, you want to be using a 7'6" like heavy action rod, something that can, especially if you're trolling them, and which is the easiest way to do it. Fan casting with Alabama rigs gets pretty tiresome after about 5 to 10 casts. So it's easier just to toss them out behind your boat or kayak. And if you have a pedal or if you're trolling motor or you're just straight trolling with your outboard, that's the easiest way to do it. Just troll dams back and forth. Look for big largemouth, big temperate bass, striped bass, hybrid striped bass. They're just looking for a school of fish to come by. And that's where your Alabama rigs are super effective. And this is the time of year where they are even more deadly because you have large fish looking to add in calories, bait fish, high caloric value, looking to eat a bunch of shad at once. I can scoop up an entire bait ball in my mouth. That's when we really see some of the biggest fish caught around the country right now is on Alabama rigs, umbrella rigs, being trolled along dams, points, creek ledges. So if you know where the creek of or river of the body of water you're on, where it cuts through, and you run both edges of those creeks, just run one direction on one ledge of the creek and come back on the other ledge, and running those 2 to 3 feet above that ledge, that's when you find some really, really big fish. But I like pairing them down with like sassy shad or the new Storm like 365 or 360, little long slender baits, something like that. You start putting big ball jig heads on there, a 1/4 ounce, you just end up with more problems than you do with catching fish. But those are definitely all the rage. They do a very good job of finding some of the biggest largemouth bass in the country at this time of year is using umbrella rigs. Speaking of those Storm kind of pre-mold, so they make the heads for them now where the soft plastic is molded to fit onto the head. So looks like that. But the soft plastic is sold like that. And there's a cutout. You can kind of see that it's cut back. It's not flush and it's meant to fit right onto, and there's actually a bait clip that's there. So I don't want to rip that one off. And I don't think that I have a loose one in here, but you basically just do that and then you pair up. It's great. I like the long, slender swim bait. I just feel like you get more hookups with better bycatch. You're going to hit walleye and saugeye if you're down along the bottom with something like that. You're going to run into temperate bass if you're out in the middle of the water column, lower third of the water column. But the long slender just seems to get more bites. But that's just personal preference. I like the long slender baits. But here's this is all pretty much Storm in here. Most of them are the pre-molds and then kind of the newer baits. And those are super expensive, like certainly not worth it you can get slender soft baits and pair them with jig heads, and it's marketing. We're going to sell you one where the fish head matches the bait profile and it fits together, but we'll sell them separately, and each one is $8. So $15 to put together like 3 of those. Not very cost effective, but they are pretty cool. These I really like. This is one of my favorite baits of all time right here. The little Storm Eye little bluegill. This is pretty small. I mean, here's my index finger. It's only maybe 2 inches long, 1.75 inches. Not very big, but man, this thing is a dynamite, like small city lake, farm pond, neighborhood pond. You can use it in a reservoir and you'll catch fish. But again, swim baits and reservoirs, you just got to know where the fish are. You're just filtering water. Big reservoirs, your crankbaits, your rattle traps, your hard baits, things that make a lot of noise, or when you're targeting structures specifically, your docks, your cover, your laydowns, your logs, your flooded timber. When you're casting at something, knowing that there's probably an ambush predator on it, so you're working every which angle of that. If you're just at, the campground, the public access site, pulled over on the side of the road, you're along a long bank with not a lot going on. There's still fish that are going to hold along that, especially if you're on riprap or a point. Even campgrounds, people just throw food into the water, so there's always fish around. But swim baits like these little soft ones. These are dynamite in smaller bodies of water, where you can run, you can fan cast. I mean, most farm ponds, you can fish the entire thing in a couple hours. I mean, you can cast at every inch of the pond. But these ones, I don't know what it is about these little bluegill ones, but I've caught some really big bass on these. I've caught some really big crappie on these. This just seems to be, of all of the different pre-molded swim baits, that this little bluegill one has always been dynamite for me. The one knock I have on these, now the Storm, this is the Storm brand one. These are a little bit more expensive. These are going to run like this. These little ones are going to run probably $4, $5, $6, depending on where you're at, for like a 3 to 5 pack. The bigger ones, the ones that are more of like a 3-inch bait profile or a 4-inch bait profile, they're going to run probably $4 to $7 for a 3 to 5 pack, depending on where you're buying them from. The knock I have on them is that they're internally weighted. So they have little eyes. This one is missing its eyes because they've been knocked off of it. But what happens is that weight is down here in the center, and it basically, I don't have one right in front of me, but it's a weird how the weight is on the hook shank. It's kind of attached to the hook shank, but it's below it. I've had these come right out of the package, and the first fish, I pulled the entire eyelid, weight, hook shank right out of the fish, or out of the bait of the fish. Not great. You can't fix them after that. They're toast. So if I had a knock on them, it's that. And then the cheaper generic models, the Bass Pro models, something like this, they're even more susceptible to that happening. So that's the one knock I got on pre-molded swim baits. They are more expensive to begin with, and they get ruined sometimes really quickly. Sometimes you can catch 15, 20, 30 fish on one of those little deals with no problems. Other times, first time out of the box, you're ripping that hook shank right out of it. And they're too expensive to be doing that with. But I do like those little bluegill ones. Those are my favorite. But they're also a good option to throw on the back of an Alabama rig. If you don't want to put your soft plastics onto jig heads, just buy a pack of 16th ounce or 8th ounce 5-pack of pre-molded, throw them on the back of a umbrella rig and let it go. Good way to work those. So that brings us through all of our swim baits for the soft plastics. So now let's move on to all of our other soft plastics, our creature baits, our worms, our tubes, our grubs, all that. Everything that's pretty prototypical in bass fishing. And when people see all these different baits, that's what they think of, is going bass fishing, flipping and pitching docks and cover, lily pads, weeds, farm ponds, wherever. This is what most people see. So we have got a lot of different boxes here for a lot of different types of bass fishing, but start with the most kind of generic Oklahoma box. So this is all Gene LaRue. This is, local Oklahoma brand. Everything in here is, you're going to see something similar marked. Any of our Oklahoma anglers, Jason Christie, Edwin Evers, you see stuff that's marked for bass, soft plastics. These are going to be the colors that you're seeing. Shaky head jigs. something like this, where the jig head itself is loose on the eye hook, so it wobbles, so the hook is able to move around. These are great for working big trick worms, crawdads, mud bugs. Something like this. Kind of get a lot of everything out of this. This could be a crawdad. This could be a tadpole. This could be a lot of different appendages on this guy. Typically, what you're looking for anytime you're rigging. Now, it's not as important on a shaky head because when this is in the water, it's going to slowly be falling one way or the other, depending on the type of bait you're using. If you're using one of like the new Z-Man soft plastics, those float. So you throw one of those on there, your hook is probably not going to be able to fall down. So it's going to be straight up. Something like this that will sink, but it sinks very slowly. Not as important because it could fall any direction. But typically, you're going to have a dark side of your bait, and then you're going to have the brighter, lighter side. You always want your hook point coming out that darker side, just like what we showed with our swim baits and the hard baits. Dark on the top, a bright or light color on the bottom, and then something that is kind of in between on the middle. Well, when you get a bait like this, we don't really have much of a middle. We just have a top and a bottom, or front and a back. But that dark side should always be the side you're looking to get your hook point through. So when you have something like this, where the fat side, that's the part of the body that we want to put the hook in. So when you go to rig this, whether it's on a shaky head, whether it's on just a normal offset hook, whether it's on a jig head, however you would do it, and with an offset hook, you almost always want to just go weedless on them. So with that, we would put this on the hook point with the bottom, the brighter side facing in towards us and the dark side facing the outer side of the hook point. You'd push it down, maybe 2 or 3 ribs and then come out. Then you work it up the hook shank and it'll twist as you go up because you went out the bottom. So once you get it up there, sits up in that little notch of the offset hook like that. And then we just run that hook point, kind of bend the bait kind of in half like this, like it's sitting in a chair. And we go right through the middle, right out the back. Got our hook point is now off. So all you do is just kind of pull the plastic just up a little bit and then just let it fall backwards. And then the hook point goes right into it. Now we're weedless. So now this guy would be, you bounce this along the bottom, just pick it up, let it fall. And then it would slowly be falling down. I mean, I can't even do it as slow as the water would have it do it. You got the volume of the water to basically hold it up. So it just slowly flutter one way or the other. You could slowly reel it along the bottom and it would just kind of be doing that, looking like some type of forage species that's eaten along the bottom, and that bass just comes down and scoops it up. But soft plastics, these are, again, you're going to see a lot of the same colors in all these boxes. Green pumpkins, some type of brown and green, some type of olive color, blue, black. What's called in a lot of packaging, something like this might be labeled as like root beer green pepper flake. But again, this is a pretty dynamite color right here, for anything. Whether this was a worm, a crawdad, a grub, twin tail grub, this color right here is probably outside of a green pumpkin, red and black, going to be your second, if not top option in Oklahoma, because this is going to do such a good job of mimicking just that very basic sunfish color that we see throughout the state in a lot of different species. So it's just a really good, anything labeled root beer, green pepper, green pumpkin with red and black, something like that. So here's one. Here we got that purple and that green. This bait itself doesn't really, it's not overly appealing. You know, it kind of could be a tadpole or a little sunfish, like, but that color right there, I mean, that is, you can't get any closer to a, you know, a juvenile bluegill than that. Whether the water's crystal clear or super muddy, like that's hitting all of our primary colors. We got that iridescent flash in the back, the body color, little bit darker on the top, little bit lighter on the bottom, but kind of keeps that greenish yellow gold all the way through it, which is, I mean, that's just what you see when you take out that bluegill. So this guy right here, again, you could fish this in a bunch of different ways. Now, this bait, you could lay it on its side like this and fish it as a trailer off of something. Um, you could also bring a hook point up through the top, a jig head, and just straight swim this in and let it side pulse like that. But this color right here, I've never seen anything that is as identical. If I was to hold a sunfish in my hand and hold this next to it, this one right here, that's about as good as it gets. If you're trying to just straight up match bluegill, juvenile bluegill, that anywhere from a half-pound bass to a 10-pound bass in your pond or lake or reservoir, what it's eating. That's pretty good right there. Then green pumpkins that maybe have that purple in it. So this one, we have kind of a green and a purple flake through it. Can't really get it to come out as much as the other one, but the flash in this is a purple and a green, as opposed to something like this that is that red. We have pretty much the same base, but this one, those flashy colors, if you're seeing a purple and a green mixed in as the flake, that's your bluegill. That's the iridescent of a juvenile female bluegill. You know, something that's not the big full-grown male bluegills that are dark blue with big red underbellies. Like, they've got all their flair, all of that. But you can certainly match that as well in a bigger bait profile, because that's what bass are used to seeing. If they're seeing those colors, it's usually in that bigger fish, and that might yield you a really good sized fish. Come and eat it. But here's one that's got we got some blue flash with kind of a green pumpkin base. Again, you can put that as a trailer on anything. We got our little crawdad legs. You can fish it straight up on an offset hook, bullet weight. You could Carolina rig this and run it across the bottom. I mean, you could even run that on a drop shot and just work it foot or two off of the bottom. But these are really the colors that you're looking for. And this box does a good job of that, because it kind of covers the best of all of our colors. Here's one, got kind of a bluish under tint to a dark green back. So, and again, this is all Jean LaRue stuff. This is all things that were made with Oklahoma in mind when they were made. So that's another thing to look at. If you see brands that have, anglers sponsored, for the brands, and it's their name, or maybe they're just the manufacturer. If they're from Oklahoma, there's a good chance that the majority of the stuff that they made through tailoring it through being here and fishing these waters. Here's basically a frog, but again, this could just be a trailer. You could put this right on the back of a spinner bait or a bladed jig, swim jig, bullet weight it, jig head it. But again, we're getting kind of that same color scheme. On one side, we're looking, and what's pretty cool about this one, and this is kind of ingenious, for making your color scheme. But on the back, we have that, that blue, that really nice kind of matches our iridescent of a bluegill. And the bottom is the same exact thing, but we have the red flake instead. I mean, if I was to combine my two favorite colors and put them into a bait, that's what it would look like. So those are really the colors you're looking for in your soft plastic. We'll go through kind of how to do different types of rigging of them, because all these boxes that I'm going to show are going to be pretty similar, just different types of bait. So here's our lizards. Again, all of our same types of colors. Got our kind of June bug color. This This is a really good color for our lizards. Our little, whether it be the skinks that are running around. Some of it is labeled like a June bug. Like this would be labeled June bug. Purple with that purple flash. Here is kind of a lighter June bug, but these just rigged with an offset, like a 2/0, 3/0 offset hook and a 16th ounce to quarter ounce bullet weight, depending on how deep you're fishing, and just straight retrieve that. When we get into the latter half of May and June, I mean, it's hard to beat. Just if you want to find some really nice fish and pretty consistently, just straight cast and retrieving some type of June bug lizard is a pretty good strategy. But we also have our green pumpkin, watermelons with the red and the black flakes. Pretty standard in here, nothing. Cotton candy. This is also kind of a good color that does a pretty good job of mimicking, again, our juvenile and female sunfish when they're in, under 6 inches. So while you are rolling a lizard through the water in your eyes, a bass could see those colors going over the top and think bluegill, I'm going to get it. So color scheme and appendages, it's really more on the color scheme of what are those fish seeing on a day-to-day basis? Are they eating a bunch of terrestrials? Are they eating primarily bluegill? You get out on the big reservoir, it becomes more of a putting in a lot more work. But if you're going to stick with a lot of just kind of the basic principles that we've talked about, you're going to find success. And hopefully you're able to dial it in to a certain part of that water body that you fish a lot. You're like, this is it. This is the color. This is the time of year. This is the habitat. This is what I'm looking for. It's just a lot easier to do that on smaller bodies of water quickly. Ponds, farm ponds, city lakes, small, less than 50-acre lakes, you can figure out pretty quickly. And if you're sticking with any of this stuff, the next 6 weeks, you're going to have a ball. This is just the time of year to get into them. Less used, but probably my favorite all-around bait for bass fishing, whether it be spotted, smallmouth, largemouth. I love tubes. I am a huge advocate of tube fishing. I don't know if it's just because fish don't see a lot of them, but it is hard, in my opinion, a Magnum squirt or a Squirmin squirt. It's Bass Pro's Crappie Max brand in green pumpkin with red flake, especially fishing small bodies of water, creeks and rivers. You'd be hard pressed to get me to fish anything other than this. I've caught monster bass on farm ponds and small lakes. And this is the big version. This is the 2 1/4. Here's my farm pond box. This is all I take to farm ponds. It's just this. Got my Ned heads, got my tube heads, got some drop shot weights and some hooks, couple little stick worms in that same color that I can drop shot or throw on a Ned head. And then I have my 3 different sizes of the same exact tube. So here's the 2-inch version of it. And here is the 1.5-inch version of it. That on a 1/32 ounce tube hook, which is going to look like this. Internally rigged. So tube hook goes up inside and then you just pop the eye hole through. This right here on a crappie rod in a pond is going to catch everything that's in your pond. I catch golden shiners on these. I catch shad on these. Sunfish, crappie, no problems. But every now and then you will tag a substantial bass on something that's that small. I mean, a 5, 6. I don't know if I've ever touched a 7-pound bass with it, but I've hit 5s and 6s with it. And you catch tons and tons of 1s, 2s, and 3s. It is just so versatile. When you're fishing ponds and small lakes especially, you're going to have more success with soft plastics. And you're going to have more success with soft plastics that don't have a lot of weight on them. So you're not throwing a 1/4 ounce. You don't want a fast fall. You don't want that rapid action. You just want something that during the course of a day in a pond, ponds are very quiet. There's not boat traffic. You might have some obnoxious resident waterfowl that stir up the water occasionally, but for the most part, it's pretty quiet. Turtles plopping in, frog jumping in, very calm and serene. That's what those fish are used to. So, I mean, most of the time, I don't even use weight. I mean, a 1/32 ounce or a 1/64 ounce on a tube is pretty much no weight. Uh, but I'll throw Senkos, some type of stick worm, wacky rigged or just Texas rigged, but without an actual weight. So just weedless rigged on an offset hook. And I'll just throw those out and you just let them just slowly fall down. And all you're waiting for is your line to get tight. Uh, I found drop shotting to be pretty effective in ponds because you can just kind of bounce it once. You're keeping your soft plastic bait lower third of the water column where those fish are sitting around cover, structure, or in a hole, but you're not making any noise. I mean, you pop that weight along the bottom. It just, if anything, it gets their attention like there's something hopping along the bottom. What is it? And then they see, whatever your bait that's sitting there. But you could, if you're out on the bigger water, especially water where there might be all three species of black bass, a bigger tube, a 3, maybe a 4-inch tube. There's different types of rigs for them. The new Ned head, any type of Ned head rig, it's going to have a bait clip on it, so you don't have to internally weight them. But when you do internally weight them, if you were to throw a big ball jig head in them or some type of like those squirm and squirt jigs where it's more of a kind of a conal, cylindrical down the hook shank. This one's more up here. If you internally rig them, once your tube gets all messed up, whether the legs have been bit off or, you pull the jig head through the top of the bait, then you have to cut them off and retie them. If you put them on like a Ned head or something, a jig head that's got a bait holding clip, you can also pair them with like using a tube to pair with a jig, like a skirted jig, whether it be a Ned head skirted jig or a bladed jig or swim jig. Tubes are just very, very versatile. They really do a great job of mimicking everything. You can make them be a crawdad. You can make them be a bait fish. They're just green pumpkin base with some type of red flake. I'm hard pressed to beat a tube for a soft plastic for bass fishing in almost any situation. Like I said at the beginning, I'm a big fan of finesse fishing. I'll pick apart docks, I'll pick apart structure, I'll stay in the same cove all day and fish. I'm not, power fishing is for temperate species, white bass, when I'm trolling or running around, trying to cover a lot of water. But when it comes to bass, I like to slow down. I really like the pull of the line, watching it go. So the anticipation's already there before you go to set the hook, as opposed to just being drilled on the back end of something that you're steadily retrieving. It could happen at any moment. And sometimes it surprises you. When you're finesse fishing, you're usually not surprised. It's just like, there's the take. I'm ready to go. Get pretty good hook sets that way. Here's a really good kind of my creek bass, river bass box. Lots of little stick worms, some Ned heads, some Ned head skirt jigs. All of this is dynamite in creeks, again, in ponds, small city lakes. It's really the big reservoirs where you have to be willing to be flexible if you want to catch fish, because some days they might be out on points feeding on shad and they are keyed in on running some type of lipless crankbait, jerkbait, lip crankbait, spinnerbait, something that's matching that. And you got to move around. You got to find it. When you're fishing smaller, 50 acres and under, lakes and ponds, creeks and rivers, you have the advantage because you can dissect almost all of the water. And if you're able to do that, then your stick worms, your tubes, those are really going to have the most effect. Your jointed swim baits that you're fishing erratically, where you're just letting it fall and flutter it up and let it fall, flutter it up, let it fall. That's really where you're going to have most of your success bass angling. when you go to the big water, when you're out on a Grand Lake, when you're out on a Texoma, Eufaula, huge bodies of water, tons of options to cover. Uh, I don't find myself bass fishing a lot of times in those situations when I'm on those bodies of water because there's better fishing for other stuff. That's an opportunity to go catch some big catfish or maybe get into some stripers or hybrid striped bass. Uh, I can catch largemouth bass in creeks and rivers across the state, and I can catch them in every city lake, in every pond. So that's kind of where I focus my efforts and energies on bass fishing. I'm not a tournament angler, so I don't have a lot of need to go, fish big bodies of water to go bass fish when there's other species that I can't catch in my neighborhood pond or going to a local creek or going to drive to fish somewhere on a smaller impoundment that's a little bit more intimate fishing experience. You get out on those big reservoirs, that's when covering a lot of water is your best friend. Trolling, running different types of bottom structure with your hard baits. That's how you're going to really key in onto where you find bass on a particular day. Now, in the next 6 weeks, you throw that out the window. You get in the backs of coves, sheltered water, dam, whatever. Any water under 8 feet on any body of water in the next 6 weeks, you're looking to catch bass in that. So it's the fun time of year where everybody can get in on the action. You don't have to be a tournament angler. You don't have to be an expert angler. You don't have to know really anything about fishing. If you can throw a worm and a bobber onto the water, odds are you're going to catch a largemouth bass in the next 6 weeks. And odds are you're probably going to catch a pretty decent one doing that. Let's see. So some other good trailers. Z-Man, little baby goats. It's just a little, every brand has some type of twin tail trailer with some ribs on it. But these are great because they're elastic. You can't ruin them, can't break them. The only thing you can do to mess these things up are to store them with other types of baits outside of their plastic wrapping. Leave them in that. I recommend it. If you're going to put them in a tackle box, make sure they're separated and make sure they have enough room to spread out on the bottom. So when that bait's in the bottom, it's not folded up. Because what happens with these is if you get them like that in the box for too long and you go and you take them out, they're going to be stuck that way because whatever chemical proprietary blend they use to make these things pretty much indestructible is also their detriment in heat and or cold if they're not allowed to just stretch out. But if you put them in a box and they lay flat like that, they're fine. Just don't mix and match them with different. They got to all be the same putting them in, or you'll learn a couple expensive lessons pretty quickly. I did it once and learned my lesson on that. So allow them to be spread out or else they can get stuck. They also freeze, which is kind of funny. No other soft plastics that I have freeze, but they'll freeze and they also start to melt when they get too hot. So they're a little temperamental, but they're a pretty good bait because if you put them on, the only thing you can do is screw them up is rigging them. Because if you go and you put them on, once they're on, they're not coming back off. Because the second you run the barb or the bait clip over the top of them and it rips the internal guts of them, that's when you ruin them. They won't do what they're supposed to do. But if you rig them right, man, they're awesome because you can literally, one of those baits you can use on 50, 60 fish without ruining it. So they're pretty cool in that regards, but they have some pricey downsides if you don't treat them right. Other baits, little drop shot type baits, things like this. Kind of the rage on smallmouth fishing up north, drop shotting, tournament anglers using stuff like this. But again, smaller bodies of water this time of year when fish are up shallow, just your green pumpkins, your blacks and blues, just in something that looks fishy that you can put in front of them and work in the banks. Now, if you're working beds as those fish, are up, if you can physically see fish on the bed, you're probably not going to catch them. You're almost never going to catch the female. You can flip at the same female fish for 8 hours and hit her in the head over and over and over again. And the male bass that's with her will come over and grab that bait and just keep going. So once you start to see fish that are physically up on beds, cast around them. Males are trying to lure in females. So you still have actively feeding fish that are just right off of those beds, kind of out of sight. So when you're working a marina, you're working your pond, you're working a city lake, you're working the cove arm of a big reservoir, parallel cast down the bank. Try not to make perpendicular casts with the bank. You want to be casting right down it, exploring every level of that water column. Starting, I start off deep, go shallow, because if there's fish shallow and they don't want it, you can spook a lot of fish by spooking one. So it's easier to start off casting kind of down your embankment, start in 8 feet of water, 10, 12 feet of water, and work your way up as you're going down. And that goes for anything. If you're fishing a creek, river, major reservoir from the bank or from a boat, pond from a kayak, float tube or from the bank, small city lake from a dock, fishing pier, however you can do it, just try to make your casts as parallel as possible with the bank. It's going to give you the most opportunity to find as many fish that are willing to maybe go out and strike. And at this time of year, you just have a lot of fish that are pushing into that kind of transition shallow zone where if you have a really defined where it comes up into a foot, 2 feet of water and it shelves off, you know where that is. And if there's any type of slide off the back of it, those fish are just going to be stacked along that slide until they physically push up to spawn or to feed. So working parallel is the best thing you can do at this time of year with any of these baits, whether it's a hard bait. Casting straight out and straight back to you to the bank, you're not going to catch fish, but you're going to eliminate a lot of opportunities to catch more fish that you probably would have because you're going to spook a few fish. You're just not putting it in the right strike zone. So that's a pretty good rule of thumb all of the time, but especially for bass as they're pushing into their spawn, parallel with the bank, parallel with the bank, parallel with the bank. Try to make those casts. Here's pretty staple, especially here in Oklahoma. Brush hogs, baby brush hogs. Again, you can fish these straight on a jig head. You could put it on some type of jig head just like this. And these are pretty straightforward. If you're putting it on a jig head, all you're doing is just working that bait up the shank and then popping it out and then pushing it up onto the bait clip. Making sure that it's flush with it. It's not hanging too low. It's not bunched up too much. The easiest way to do that, if you haven't done it a million times, is when you get the soft plastic, just hold it up to the hook that you're going to put it on to begin with, especially if you have to work the entire bait onto the hook shank. So all you got to do is just hold it up against that, the collar of where the bait clip's at, like that. And you know that the hook needs to come out through that rib. So when you you just hold it right there. And when you push it on, to bring it out. With brush hogs, you can come out either side. Just make sure your hook point is always coming out perpendicular with your appendages. You don't want it coming out you don't want the hook point coming out with the appendages. But brush hogs are usually the same color. They're not dual colored. So it doesn't matter which side you put them on or off of. And then if you're going to Texas rig or weedless rig, same thing, except this time it doesn't really matter. You don't need to line it up. All you're doing is you're putting that hook point through, coming down, 4, 5, 6 ribs. You can see how much space you have to work with. Now, I like to get it on there to once I tie on my knot, I've given myself a little bit extra. So as I'm tied onto the line, I actually pull the soft plastic up to where it's completely blocking the eye guide. So that little eyelid, when I'm actually rigged on there and my knot's coming off the top, you can no longer, all you're going to do is just see my line coming out on the top of it. And that's because a lot of times I'm fishing weightless. So I don't want anything to be seen. Now, if you're going to have a bullet weight Texas rigged on the top of it like that, well, then that doesn't really matter. And some people will peg them. So some of them will come with different types of stoppers. You can put a slip cork stopper up your line. There's lots of different ways that you can stop them. Other people just allow them to free on the line. So when it dives down, it dives out ahead. And this slowly comes down the line until it catches up with the deal. Now, if you have it pinned there, it's all going to fall at the same rate, which on bigger water, when you're trying to cover a lot of water, trying to create a lot of, reaction, well, then you like that heavier weight. You like being able to bounce it around, make a lot of movement, because you're trying to get a fish's attention in a huge body of water. When you're in a pond, small lake, you're trying to be a little bit more subtle. If you're bouncing it around left and right, yeah, you might get a reactionary strike, but more often than not, you can pinpoint a log or a piece of cover where more often than not, there's going to be a fish waiting there for you. So you just want to flip something out there that hits the water quietly and it's just fluttering down, unsuspecting. Bass comes over and grabs it. Here's some worms, different types of worms here. These are all pretty standard colors for bass fishing. Big red worm. This is a good one, like in the winter months, pre-spawn, big 10, 11-inch red worm. Putting that down in 25, 30 feet of water around cover gives off, gets dark down there. There's not a lot of light penetration. So a big red worm can really get their attention, especially during the pre-spawn and winter months. But once you move up into this time of year, pretty standard. Green pumpkin or black with the chartreuse tail. These have these at one time were the rage in fishing. This was the greatest thing ever. Then we moved into like trick worms and finesse worms, where you got kind of a longer, fatter body up here, a little slender in the back with a little bulb. You can work these a lot of different ways on a lot of different hooks. I'm pretty partial to stick worms. I love Gary Yamamoto Senkos, but they are expensive and they break very easily. So you don't get a whole lot of lifespan out of these. But this just wacky rigged. So just a hook that comes right through the middle like this. You could put a piece of split shot 6 inches up your line if you need to get down a little bit deeper, but still keep a fairly slow fall. Or you could just rig it weedless, go right through the top like we've shown, out through the back. And instead of putting a bullet weight on it to Texas rig it, you just leave it just like that, pitch it out, let it fall, let it go all the way down to the bottom, pop your rod tip up once, let it fall, pick up your slack, pick it up, let it fall. Again, if you're working parallel with the bank or you're pitching or flipping to a particular piece of structure, then it should be fall, pop, reel it in if it didn't take it at that point. Working a weedless bait is going to take you 10 minutes to get it back in if you go through the process. And usually if you're pitching to a particular piece of cover or structure, the fish is either there or they're not, or they're willing to bite or they're not. You start moving it back towards you through open water, odds are you're not going to find a fish on your way in, and you're just kind of wasting time, not making other, more casts with it. But hard to go wrong, really, at this time of year on any type of water. I really love a wacky rigged stick worm. Anywhere that I go, like that red and black color, like a black orange, kind of a Halloween color, and then obviously your green pumpkins with red and black, watermelon, standard colors like that. This again is more of a river bass. This would be more like smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, spotted bass on the Illinois or Blue River. We got some mud bugs, twin tail grubs, some chomper twin tail grubs. But again, you can find success with these. These are going to match a lot of different types of forage in any body of water. So, but again, very good color right here. That kind of root beer, green pepper flake. That'd be my second best option, maybe third best option outside of a green pumpkin and red flake, and then maybe a watermelon and red flake. I don't have a lot of confidence with black and blue. Some people, that is all they use, black and blue. I find success with it, particularly with largemouth bass, but not as much as I do with green pumpkin and red flake. That's my go-to color. I have a lot of confidence in that. No matter where I go, no matter what type of body of water I'm on, I am going to find success with my tube, with a stick worm. And then if I'm using a crankbait or something that's got like that iridescent purple back with kind of some bluegill markings through the middle. Like those are my three baits if I'm going bass fishing anywhere. That's what I'm going to start with. And from there, we'll see where it comes to. super, super basic is just, curly tail grubs, things that you probably have in your box. These are great for kids, farm ponds, uh, lake shore if you're camping. Again, I would keep it pretty basic, something like a brown or a green pumpkin. You just put this on an 1/8 ounce jig head, really any size, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, 5 inch. Throw it on an 1/8 ounce jig head or a road runner head, something that might have a little flasher on it, something like that. Road runner head, very basic. Just make lots of casts. Kids will find fish with those. Adults will find fish with those. But if you got something in the box that's just a pretty basic, how to go catch bass anywhere you go, curly tail grub in a natural color with an 1/8 ounce jig head, cast and retrieve. It doesn't get any more basic, simple than that for bass fishing, and you're going to have success anywhere you go. And if you catch it on the right day at the right time, could be exceptional for you. And then I always keep a box with me that's just got an assortment of hooks and weights in it. So I've got lots of my drop shot hooks and drop shot weights, and then some different types of jig heads through here. But kind of covers all of our baits. See if we got anything over here. Yeah, so work for smallmouth. Yeah, most of this stuff will work for smallmouth. Now, if I'm exclusively smallmouth fishing, I'm sticking with a tube or a twin tail grub, or a white fluke if I'm in moving water, where I can just toss a fluke out into the current, weedless and weightless, and let it skirt the top and slowly sink into the film and cast cross current. Those smallmouth will come up and get that. But other than that, I'm using a green pumpkin tube or some type of green pumpkin, California craws, what Z-Man labels their stick bugs. But these are just, I think, like yum dingers, little small ones, but something that is going to be in like this color. That's what I'm smallmouth bass fishing with, is either something like that, but more often than not, I'm using a tube and working it. Oklahoma wind. Yeah. So with bass fishing and fishing really in general, wind is your friend. So you're looking, and now it's no fun to fish in gale force winds, even if the fishing can be spectacular. Sometimes that kind of limits your options, especially if you're out on a boat. But you're always looking to target wind blown shoreline, wind blown points. So that's where predators stack up, especially after a couple of consistent days of it as the water warms up. So southern winds, western winds that are pushing into either the eastern bank, northeastern bank, points on the eastern side of the lake that are getting blown over with those south winds. That's what you're looking for with wind. This time of year, we're looking for warm days. That's great, but stable weather. If you can get really good bites as storm systems are approaching, can be pretty brutal post frontal for a day or two, depending on how much rain came in, how wacky was the temperature, what was the pressure change. But typically bluebird, clear blue sky days with no wind in clear water is pretty tough. Those fish can see everything. They can sense all the vibrations. Wind just provides cover for the angler, and it also creates a lot of chaos and activity within the water for bait fish that are getting blown around, predators disrupting those schools. So, 15-mile-an-hour wind day, which is no wind in Oklahoma, but just enough to put a little bit of chop on the water, not white capping, but just enough to break up the surface. Cloud cover is great. Cloud cover can accomplish the same thing that wind does. If you pair the two together, you can get really exceptional fishing days. But that's what you're looking for when it comes to wind. And all of this stuff is going to work in the wind. Now, do you want to throw a finesse, weedless, weightless bait out in your pond when it's 20-mile-an-hour winds? If you're really comfortable doing it, and you've done it enough and you know what to look for, yeah. But if you're just getting started out and you're going to go try to throw a weedless, weightless deal, you don't want to be doing that in 30-mile-an-hour winds. You probably don't even want to be doing it in 15-mile-an-hour winds. Those types of presentations are great in smaller bodies of water when you do have what would be considered a tough fishing condition on a big body of water. Big body of water, those fish are going to, they can scatter. Rivers, creeks, ponds, small city lakes, Fish only have so many options. They can't go as far. So as an angler, you have, much greater success chasing after them. That's why Cedar Lake has been so popular in the last decade. It obviously has our current state record largemouth bass, but there is a bunch of fish in there that are over 7, 8 pounds, which to most people, that is a trophy largemouth bass. You catch largemouth bass over 6 pounds. I mean, that's a trophy. I don't care where you are in the country. Like, that's a big fish. You start hitting largemouth 6+ pounds, it's an exceptional fish. Most largemouth bass are going to be between 1 and 3 pounds. That 3 to 5 pound, that wins you money in tournaments. Things over 6 pounds are, take a picture. Some people, that's hang it up on the wall. But your smaller impoundments, that's where you're really going to have the most success bass fishing every day of the week. And it's going to cost you very little money. It's probably close to where you live. You only need soft plastic baits to accomplish, catching the biggest fish in those ponds. Like I said, I mean, I recommend it this time of year, especially if you have a good farm pond, good neighborhood pond, something where you've caught some decent fish out of, or you've heard decent fish. Take yourself a crappie nibble or, couple worms, catch a 4-inch bluegill, 5-inch bluegill, hook them right behind the dorsal fin in that little soft spot where the fan comes over. Just get that hook, like a little size 1 hook, size 1/0 hook, size 0, size 2 hook, somewhere in that kind of medium small hook range. Put it right through the back, flip that thing out anywhere around cover, shoreline, dam, and just wait 5 minutes. More likely than not, in the month of April, within 5 minutes, one of the bigger fish in that entire pond is going to come grab onto that bluegill. And it gives you a sense of kind of what's in there. And then it teaches you, like, this is what those fish are looking for. You get out on the big water, a big reservoir, you might find some fish stacked up on one dock. You might find some fish stacked up on one point. But if you're a bank angler, you're kind of limited to what's in front of you. And if you go to a city lake, or you go to a close to home area, or you go to a neighborhood pond, or you have your own farm pond, you're going to get a lot more value out of bass fishing in those areas. Just because the catch rates are going to be greater. You're more than likely going to catch bigger fish overall. The growth potential in a 2-acre pond is not the same as it is in Arbuckle Lake, but usually in a pond that size, you're going to have several fish that are over 5 pounds. Some of which that are going to teeter on that 10-pound class, depending on whether or not you're in the southern part of the state, or if you have Florida strain mixed into your genetics of your pond or the city lake. All those are going to kind of size out. But northern strain largemouth in a 5-acre, 20-acre or less, but even in small ponds, a half-acre pond, an acre pond, you're going to have a substantial amount of fish that are over 3 pounds, way more than you think that are in there. And weedless, weightless, really soft weight, 16th ounce, 1/8 ounce is kind of the highest I will go if I'm fishing, anything under 20 acres, under 50 acres in the most case. You don't need to be out in 30 feet of water. Depth is relative depending on what body of water you're in. So in most of those impoundments, 25 to 40 feet is the deepest part. And that's probably just a little hole out near the dam, maybe a creek channel that runs through that was pretty dramatic before it was flooded, maybe 15-foot wall. But outside of that, you're looking at 2 to 12 feet. You can accomplish anything in that realm, weedless, weightless, and be spot on. And you're probably going to have more success than if you're out there ripping crankbaits, rattle traps, spinner baits. That the only disruption that you might get on a body of water like that is going to be using top water. Buzz baits, you can get fish to come up. Poppers, you can get fish to come up. But a lot of times, again, the more successful topwater baits are going to be the quiet, low profile, very natural looking baits that are moving across the water. How's the bite in the rain? Depends on the type of rain. Rain can be your best friend. Rain can be your worst enemy. Typically, again, if you have some type of weather system, so if it's just a warm rain, it's just overcast, cloudy, no lightning, no thunder, low wind, bite's going to be pretty good. That rain's going to be knocking bugs into the water off of trees, which is going to get bait fish active, which is going to get predators active. It's going to have frogs jumping in the water. It's going to have snakes moving across the water. Rain and wind in relativity, in moderation, are an angler's best friend. But if it's torrential downpour, lightning, safety issue, winds blowing too much, that fish may be biting, but you as an angler, it's more of an inconvenience to be out there than it isn't. So definitely take advantage of what would be considered a dreary day. But if it's full blown storming, there's not really much of a need to be out there during that. Is there much of a population of largemouth in Call Lake? Yep. Yeah, every lake in the state has a substantial population of largemouth bass. Some of them are going to be pure northern strain river fish that were impounded. So fish in fish in Keystone, those are Arkansas River fish that lived in the Arkansas River before they were impounded. Now their offspring are lake fish that live there, but there's good populations of black bass in every body of water in the state. Some are just more substantial than others. Some get more notoriety than others because of the size of the fish, but there's plenty of fish that get caught out of Call Lake every year that are in the 4 to 6 pound range without breaking a sweat. So you're hard pressed to find a body of water in the state of Oklahoma that doesn't have what would be considered at worst a decent population of some black bass, whether it's largemouth, smallmouth, or spotted, or all three, or 2 of 3. You're going to find that anywhere you go in the state. Like Route 66 Park. Route 66 Park probably has some really big bass in it. Now, overall population, probably not that great, but my guess is there are probably some really big fish in there because there are shad in there. We stock trout in there now. There's lots of forage to grow some really, really big fish in there. Maybe not necessarily a huge population of catchable size fish, but fish over 4 pounds, there's probably a few in there. And if you're hitting Route 66, I would stick to those reeds back where the bridges go over on would that be the east side of the pond, the Overholser side of the pond. That's where I would focus bass fishing efforts on that. I'm sure there's a lunker hidden up in those reeds. All right, we're at 3:30. We had a lot to cover. There's a lot of baits. I mean, it can be overwhelming with baits, especially for bass fishing. But unless you're planning on becoming a tournament angler, or you're just getting in on tournament angling, bass fishing is really just about identifying productive areas of a body of water and finding something that works and just rinse, wash, repeat on that. You're always going to have bass that are shallow year round. Sometimes that's just going to be the little juveniles, the year-olds, 2-year-olds, fish under 14 inches. They're still fun to catch. If you can get out on your pond or small city lake or even the big lake, big reservoir, you get out there, you got a good cove that always holds fish, that's where you go back to. So unless you're really just trying to go catch yourself, you're a trophy hunter, you're looking for that one big wall hanging fish, or you're trying to make money from fishing, bass fishing really comes down to small city lakes, ponds, creeks, and rivers. You're going to have a blast. You're going to catch a ton of fish. You're going to catch some substantial fish. In some occasions, you might catch the fish that will be the biggest bass you ever catch in your life. And you could go pound Arbuckle 365. You still might catch a bigger fish in a pond or a small city lake than you could ever catch in a trophy lake like that. And you're going to catch them a lot easier. You're going to have less pressure. Most people who go out to small lakes and ponds are throwing crankbaits, are throwing spinner baits. They're throwing loud, intrusive, even when they're throwing soft plastics, they're throwing 1/4 ounce jig heads, 1/2 ounce jig heads. It's just too much. It's not to say you're not going to catch a fish, and not to say you're not going to catch a really decent fish occasionally. But if you are just straight up looking to catch the most amount of fish every time you go fishing, with the opportunity to plug decent fish as you're doing it, small bait profiles, subtle bait profiles like a stick worm, If you're going to size up your bait to a 5-inch bait, well, then you wacky rig it, and now it's 2.5 on either side. So when it's fluttering down and the bass goes and swallows it, your hook is right dead smack in the middle of that bait. So you're essentially fishing a 2.5-inch bait. You put a offset hook on it that's like a 2, 3, 4, 5/0 hook. You're still 2.5 inches down. So you still only have 2.5 inches to overcome from the back of the bait to get hooked up on. So that, but if you're using a swim bait and you're ripping it through the water, it's not a subtle profile, and that fish has got to come hammer it. Odds are the fish ain't going to, it's not going to chase for that because it's got easier food sources in the body of water to begin with. Why am I going to chase an unnatural looking white bait fish halfway across this pond when a bluegill or a frog or anything's bound to swim in front of me any minute? They know that. So sticking with natural colors, browns, blacks, blues, greens. You stick with that. You stick to bait profiles. Depending on how you're rigging it, soft plastics under 5 inches, but in most cases, 3 inches and under. You're going to catch tons and tons of 1/2 pound to 3 pound fish. And depending on what body of water you're fishing in, you're going to have every opportunity to hit 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pound fish that are in those bodies of water using those same exact baits. And you can, like I said, when I go pond fishing, I don't know where that box has made its way to. Here it is. This is all I take. This is all that goes around with me. Anytime I go to family's house that have ponds, when I go try new ponds, I go to a new city lake, this is all I take right here. Fits right in this. 3 different sizes of tubes, one size of the same colored stick worm, some Ned heads that are 1/10 ounce and 1/15 ounce, so pretty light. A couple of them have weedless barbs on them. Then I have a couple of my different size 16th ounce, 8th ounce drop shot weights with some different size hooks, my tube hooks, and then I always keep some brightly colored baby shad for crappie. And every now and then you get good bass fishing and sun fishing with those brightly colored ones, especially if you have like golden shiners or something. But that's my box. I mean, this fits into my back pocket. I take a 6'6" medium light action rod with that, put it in my pocket. My clippers fit right into it, pair of pliers. That's all I take to lakes under 20 acres, ponds, and that's all I need. And I have no problems. This box was built off of years of realizing that all of these, different creatures and tubes, and while they all catch fish, that little box right there will outfish any of these other boxes 10-1 any day of the week. And so that's really what you're looking for. Find stuff you're confident in, put them in a box, take them back, rinse, wash, and repeat. And if you're going to go bass fishing on the big water, then having a couple of different types of crankbaits with purple backs, olive green backs, but sticking one crankbait with the bluegill, one crankbait that's a shad. But in the natural versions, not they'll label them exaggerated. It'll be, chartreuse bluegill or sexy chrome shad or something like that. You just want the most generic looking, what looks like a shad. If I was to go hold the shad, what's it going to look like? Do you have something that looks like that and something that looks like a bluegill? Great starting point. And then, maybe a top water bait. Especially if you're fishing early morning, late evening around those points and coves, you can draw some largemouth up to the top. Maybe one spinner bait, 2 spinner baits, one in a bluegill color, one in a chartreuse and white with a couple of trailer options that match that. But aside from that, you just get out to the big water. It's really about finding fish. And these next 6 weeks, really now, I mean, we're probably already in it for a couple of weeks in some parts of the state. This is your opportunity to go to a large body of water, find a piece of riprap, find a cove with public access that you can bank fish from. And you have the opportunity that you might catch a really, really substantial largemouth bass that is coming up to spawn. And you may find them in pretty good numbers in certain areas. But outside of this time of year, and again for a few weeks in the fall, unless you're going out to make your money doing it, or you're just trying to land a fish of a lifetime, keep your bass fishing to utilize your close to home waters, whether that's an actual close to home fishery or it's just something that's close to home, your neighborhood pond, a pond in a neighborhood near where you live, a city lake, a small lake that is near your home within 30 minutes, because you shouldn't have to drive anywhere in Oklahoma more than 30 minutes to find really, really good largemouth bass fishing for most of the year. So that's really what you're looking for. But with that, we're well into this one. I don't see any more questions. Thank you all for coming. The next one that we have in April at the end of this month is pond fishing. So that one I can get much more detailed into the ins and outs, and because we'll cover bass, crappie, sunfish, catfish. But I love pond fishing. I love small impoundment fishing, especially for bass species. And I love rivers and creeks. That's kind of my bread and butter when it comes to bass fishing. And we have a couple of those coming up. The streams one, I think, is at the end of May, and the pond one is the end of I think the last week of April, or the second to last week of April. But those ones, those are good to, if you want to learn something about pond fishing or creek fishing, I can really break those ones down into great detail, because there's not as much to talk about. We don't need all of these different lures, but for largemouth bass in general, these are all lures that you're going to see in a retail store or online or in an article or on a video or anywhere. But everybody's going to have their own personal opinion of what works best, because that's what works best for them. That's the great thing about largemouth bass fishing. They are a sunfish with a voracious appetite that eats pretty much anything it can fit in its mouth, and it just happens to have the biggest mouth of anything else that's in the water with it. So great fish to get into. And this time of year, it's just, if you have the opportunity, take somebody new with you. Take that family member who's maybe asked a couple of times. Take that buddy from work who's talked about fishing with you. And this is the time. I mean, April in Oklahoma is, if you could get somebody hooked on fishing, or just take somebody out to actually have a good fishing experience. Weather's usually mild, bites pretty good, probably going to catch a few decent fish. Like, this is the time of year to take them. And you don't know how far that goes for hunting and fishing, not only in our state, but in our country. We're a user pay, user benefit. We need people to continue these traditions as we move on. And it's no fun going out and not catching fish. Fishing can be tough at a lot of times a year. So take advantage of March and April, and to some extent May in Oklahoma, depending on the water body. Take advantage of fishing creeks and rivers in the summer when those are lights out. I mean, Oklahoma's pretty much got an 8-month fishing window, where if you're going to the right places, targeting the right species at the right, at the particular times of year, fishing's great all the way through that. If you try to go catch largemouth bass in the same body of water the same way every day for 8 months, you're going to have some great days and you're going to have some really bad days. So starting in March, it's really just about, what do you love to do? How can you maximize doing that? And then how can you share that with other people who you think would enjoy it or take to it? And that's all we can do. So appreciate everybody being here. We'll see y'all next time. And tight lines, stay safe out there. Looks like we get some warm weather coming in here this weekend. So be looking for those light switches in places that they haven't already flipped to turn on here in the next week or two. But with that, y'all have a good weekend. We'll see you next time.